Welcome. Welcome to this Introduction to Positive Psychology course. I will use this introduction session to tell you about the goal of this course and to tell you about the learning principles on which this course is based on. So the goal of this course is to enable you to make a long-term and positive change. So the emphasis is, well, first of all on positive, but second of all, on long-term. And long-term means that you will hopefully be able to sustain the changes that you make throughout the days, not only during you taking this course. So in order for you to be able to build this positive long-term change, there are a few learning principles, 5 exactly, on which this course is based on and which I ask you to adhere to, so you will get most out of this course. The first of them is that it is a science-based course, which is actually nothing that you have to do, but something that's more something that I have to do. Everything that I tell you is based on science in some way or the other. That it's based, I'm telling you ideas that have been tested and retested for many years, for decades. And only what has been solidly found is what I present to you. What this also means is that you will see in the resources, you have a list of references for every class. And these references are here for 2 reasons. The first reason is that, well, it's a science-based course. That means I have to reference what I say. Otherwise, I can just make up things. But everything that I say is grounded in research, so that's why the references are there. But second of all, I want to give you, if you want to, the chance to read more into research. And it's easy. You can just, if you want to, you can just type in, take the references if something's interesting for you, look it up in Google, or maybe even better in Google Scholar, and you will find more information. You will find maybe a research paper that you can read, and that will basically tell you in a more scientific language and in a more abstract way what I'm trying to tell you here. The second of the learning principles is that it's an applied course. It may be the most important of the learning principles because, unfortunately, we cannot make positive long-term change if we don't do anything about it. Unfortunately, it's not enough to just watch the video lectures. There will be some interesting ideas that you will pick up and you might be able to implement some in your life, but you really will get most out of it if you're willing to engage in the material, if you're willing to look at the additional materials that I provide, and maybe even exchange with others in the forum. Throughout the course, you will see that there are 2 kinds of repetitive slides that come up over and over again. The first one is this one, and it basically marks a timeout. It says also timeout. That means basically that during the lectures, if the slide comes up, I will present some small activity or something that you can do right on the spot. And I ask you to pause the video there and think about it or write something down or whatever I ask you to do in this very moment. The second kind of repetitive slide is this one here. And this one indicates that there is a writing exercise that you can do. There are much more writing exercises in the additional materials than the ones that I present during the course, but the ones I present during course I especially recommend it because they have been very well founded in research and have been tested numerous times and shown to be effective for a large number of people. So it's these 2 set of slides that will come up over and over again, and these set of slides that ask you right in the course to engage in the material. The fourth of the learning principles is that I ask you to be engaged in the material. That means do the exercises not for the sake of doing them. The intention that you bring to the exercise matters very much for the outcome. But also engage in the lectures. Do take part in the timeouts. take part in the writing exercises, and pay full attention to the lectures, because that's how you get most out of this course. And lastly, but not least, we have the fifth learning principle, which is remain critical. Just because it's based on science doesn't mean that everything's going to work for you perfectly. People are very different. So some of the exercises will appeal more to you and others won't. And that's normal. And that's why you have a whole range of different additional materials to choose from, a whole range of different exercises. Take the ones that fit best for you. Maybe give the others a try later on. It's all up to you. The most important thing is that you apply the things to your life. And in order to exemplify the importance of applying what you learn to your life, and not only listening to the lectures, I want to read out to you this wonderful quote by Archibald MacLeish. Because what he says is, what is wrong is not the great discoveries of science. Information is always better than ignorance, no matter what information or what ignorance. What is wrong is the belief behind the information. The belief that information will change the world. It won't. And that's exactly why you have all these additional materials and all these ways to apply the knowledge to your life. I very much encourage you to do that, and I invite you to exchange with others on the forum and ask questions to me in the forum. Go for it. What I am going to present you in this course is mostly based on the science of positive psychology. And that is why we'll start with the question, what is positive psychology? The definition is that it is a science that revisits the average person with an interest in finding out what works, what is right, and what is improving. It is an approach within psychology that is meant to complement the majority of traditional psychological research that has been done before, which is marked by a focus on clinical settings and a focus on people with mental illnesses. We'll now explore how it is different to what's already out there and why it is needed. First, underlying this new approach is an understanding that happiness is not the negation of unhappiness. Let's look at these two models here, the disease versus the health model that demonstrates this kind of thinking. Over the last 1.5 decades, it has become very clear that, for example, overcoming depression does not mean that you are happy and flourishing. It takes a different skill set, so to say, to go from -5 to 0, then from 0 to, let's say, +7. The area from -10 to 0 is only half of the story. If we neglect the area from 0 to +10, then we are missing out on much of what makes life most worth living. Positive psychology operates within this health model. It focuses on people's strengths instead of their weaknesses. It focuses on building what is good instead of only overcoming deficiencies. And it tries to find ways to be happier instead of always running away from unhappiness. Please notice that positive psychology does not deny that it's important to study depression and so on. It seeks to complement the focus of traditional psychology. Anger and sadness are important, and there are times in life when we feel unhappy, and that's okay and good. We will come to these topics in a class that's at the end of this course, but for now we focus on the positive side of human life. The second reason why positive psychology is needed is that we have to start learning from the best. Positive psychology, as I just said, looks at the positive side of things, looks at the people who perform best, who are the happiest, the most successful, and so on. Because if we want to know more about what makes life really good, it is not enough to study the average person. Let me give you an example. Marty Seligman, he is one of the pioneers of positive psychology, and often referred to as the founding father, started off his research career studying helplessness. Helplessness is a feeling that we are not in control of what is happening to us, and it's highly correlated with depression. If you feel helpless, if you feel like you can't do anything to improve your life, or that you're just a slave to your circumstances, that's unfortunately a pretty good indicator that you're tending towards depression. So far, so bad. But it turns out that there's a group of people who do not give up, who do not become helpless, even though they are not in control of a situation. There's a group of people who never give up and who won't become depressed, no matter what you do to them. Positive psychology is about studying this group of people, the ones who are doing really well. And then it tries to find out what they do differently and how we all can learn from them. Positive psychology is ultimately concerned with helping people to become the best they are able to become. The third reason is that we need empirical evidence to understand what really works. From this perspective, positive psychology can be contrasted to the self-help movement. The self-help movement is characterized by slogans or book titles like these that you see here. 10 steps on how to be happy, and how to be rich and happy, whatever you want, whenever you want. Or 6 surefire ways to get your smile on. In the self-help movement, you have charismatic speakers and very appealing titles, and of course, very interesting topics. But the problem is that they are very often over-promising and under-delivering. There is no research to question and to prove if it's really working or not. On the other hand, you have academia. It's very rigorous, and you will see these kind of research titles in the references that I provide throughout the course. They are not part of your regular learning experience, but I included them for 2 reasons. Firstly, because this course is based on scientific research and findings. Hence, I have to provide proof for what I'm saying. And secondly, because I want to give you, those of you who are really interested in research, a chance to learn more about it. But what this course is all about is finding the middle ground. The middle ground between self-help and science. The main question becomes then, how can we apply this research to help us make long-lasting positive change? This middle ground is also what made positive psychology, back when it was taught at Harvard University a few years ago, the most popular course at the university. And nowadays, organizations, consulting companies, governments and schools, all of these are taking on positive psychology. And the reason why is because it works. Because it really works. As you will see throughout this course, if you take the lessons, if you take the research and apply it to your lives. Here's a quick roundup of this lecture. Positive psychology is the science of what makes life good. It looks at what works, what's right, and what's improving. Now let's take a look at what is happiness. Psychologists look at happiness from 2 different positions. We'll take a closer look to get a better understanding of what we can think about when we think of happiness. But first, I invite you to take a minute before we move on and think about what happiness means to you. Pause the lecture here and just write down what your own definition of happiness is. Welcome back. Keep in mind what you wrote down and maybe contrast it with what I'll tell you now. Happiness is something that has to be defined by everyone individually. That is also why scientists call it subjective well-being. Essentially, you know best how happy you are. That's why I invite you to examine and monitor what works for you, what makes you happier. Throughout this course, I'll present various things that you can do to become happier and more fulfilled. Not every exercise or strategy will work for everybody. Everything I present to you is scientifically researched, but that does not mean that everything works for everybody. Try everything, but acknowledge that there is no panacea that makes everybody lastingly happier. In research, psychologists distinguish roughly between two different understandings of happiness. First, we will look at hedonic happiness. Happiness from this perspective is simply feeling good and being satisfied with one's life. There are three factors which influence it: how satisfied we are with our lives, how often we feel good, and how often we feel bad. So it's about pleasure and satisfaction. But there is a problem. If you could be connected to an experience machine that would keep you in a constant state of cheerful happiness, it will give you a constant feeling of pleasure regardless of what happens in your life. Would you choose to get hooked up? Well, it turns out that for most people, simply feeling good and being satisfied is not enough. It's not the only thing that matters, and that's why there's another complementary definition of happiness: eudaimonic happiness. It is a concept that is as old as human philosophy and taken from the ancient Greeks. Eudaimonic happiness means the actualization of our human potential, not simply experiencing good feelings. True happiness is living in accordance with one's true nature. It has a much wider definition and encompasses all of these areas: self-esteem, or having fulfilling relationships, accepting oneself, and mastering one's environment. Achieving, and so this definition of happiness also includes what we think success means to us. Also, having a higher meaning, a higher purpose in our lives. And last but not least, personal growth. There is even more to that, but now look back on your list, or what you wrote before, when you thought about what does happiness mean to you, and maybe rethink it. Maybe you have to refine it. What are your thoughts? Rounding up, happiness can be viewed from two different angles: hedonic happiness and eudaimonic happiness. This understanding provides the basis for this course. Happiness is much more than simply feeling good as often as possible. Nearly all of us buy into what Sonja Lyubomirsky, one of the leading happiness researchers, calls the myths of happiness. Those are beliefs that certain achievements, like getting married or having kids, or getting certain kind of jobs, or making a certain amount of money, will make us forever happy. And that certain failures or adversities, like health problems or not having a life partner or having just little money, will make us forever unhappy. But overwhelming research evidence actually reveals that there is no such magic formula for happiness, and no sure course towards misery. So one such happiness myth is the notion that I will be happy when something happens. Fill in the blank. I'll be happy when I get that promotion, when I have a baby, when I'm rich, or something like that. The myth is not that achieving those dreams won't make us happy. They almost certainly will. The problem is that these achievements, even when initially perfectly satisfying, will not make us intensely happy for the long run. And definitely not as happy as we believe they will. Because when fulfilling these goals doesn't make us happy as we expected, we feel there must be something wrong with us. We feel we must be the only ones to feel this way. But that's actually not the case. Almost everybody falls for one or the other kind of happiness myth. Similarly, the other kind of happiness myth is the belief that I can't be happy when. I can't be happy when something negative happens. For example, when a negative change of fortune befalls us, our reaction is often supersized. We feel that we can never be happy again, that our lives as we know them are over now. That would be, I can't be happy when I don't have a partner, like my partner left me. I will never ever be happy again. Or I can't be happy now that I'm broke. Although it may appear that some of these major challenges will definitely and permanently change our lives, for the better or for worse, it is really our responses to them that govern their repercussions. Indeed, it is our initial reactions that make these turns of events into crisis, in the first place, instead of foreseeable and even ordinary passages of life that they actually are. This may seem a little bit counterintuitive, but it's actually true, and we will explore in a second why our mind is so bad at understanding what makes us happy and what doesn't make us happy, especially when it comes to longer term things. Unfortunately, human beings aren't very accurate in predicting their emotional reactions to future events. And this is what is explained by effective forecasting. So we take action on this belief, explicit or implicit, that one action will lead us to greater happiness, greater rewards than some alternative action. Whether we're trying to decide what to have for breakfast or whether or not to get married, every decision is based on the belief that one choice will probably lead us to feel better than another choice. The problem is that whether we look at minute events such as receiving negative feedback or things that are more important like the election of the next president, for example, what we find is pretty much the same across the board. People almost always overestimate the intensity and the duration of their future emotional reactions. For instance, when researchers ask to predict how they will feel 2 months after a breakup, people often expect to feel devastated. But when you actually compare them with those who have already gone through a breakup, you find that the effects tend to be milder and wear off much more quickly than people initially predict. So why is that? One of the reasons is a phenomenon that researchers call the hedonic treadmill. A major problem with seeking happiness in our external circumstances is that we adjust very rapidly to those circumstances. So if we get a new car, an award, a specific sum of money, for example, when we do reach those goals, we very quickly adapt to these new circumstances. We very quickly find new, greater goals to work towards too. The happiness you expect to last has quickly moved ahead with these new goals and left you behind. We very quickly forget and ignore what we have as our focus continually shifts to those things that we want. Also, because of evolution, we are wired to want more. We are wired to want the things we don't have, because that's what ensures our survival. But nowadays, our survival is not threatened. Nowadays, we care about having happy and fulfilled lives. So for example, if you move to a larger, nicer apartment, for the first week or two, you will probably feel elated. It's great. The bedroom is so spacious, the living room is stylish, and the view is magnificent. But after a few weeks, the novelty begins to wear off, and you begin to become adapted to your new circumstances. The view from your bedroom window no longer makes you smile. You begin to take these things for granted, and you may even begin finding faults with your fantastic view. The place that initially seemed perfect suddenly has areas in need of improvement. If only the shower were a little bit bigger, or the bedroom had another closet, or the balcony would be really nice. Or maybe it's time for a house instead of an apartment, and so on and so on. This concept of adapting to our circumstances is known as the hedonic treadmill, a term coined by two famous researchers, and it basically says that the status quo is never enough. We keep running, pursuing things that we think will make us happy, only to find that our level of happiness remains about the same. So does this mean that whatever we do will always go back to base level? A base level that's maybe determined by our genes? No. No, we do have influence on our well-being. But for a very long time, psychologists believe that we always go back to our base levels. So for a very long time, psychologists believe that we actually do not have influence on at least not on our long-term happiness. But as I said, this turned out to be wrong. We actually are able to increase our happiness and our success in the long term. It's just that the strategies that we usually use to do this are flawed. Because beyond having our basic human needs fulfilled, that means having enough food, having a place to live, living in a free society where we're not oppressed. Once these needs are fulfilled, our external circumstances matter surprisingly little. And to demonstrate this, I want to share with you a quote of Ed Diener. He's also one of the pioneers of happiness research, researching for more than 30 years now. And he puts this like this. He says, "It appears that the way people perceive the world is much more important to happiness than objective circumstances." This means that happiness has to, up to a certain extent, to be found within ourselves. And what exactly this means, and how we can indeed change, is what we will explore throughout this course. In the last class, we looked at happiness as if it was an end in itself. And indeed, happiness and feeling good is its own purpose. But it is actually also much more than that. Because, as we will see, happiness is an ingredient to success. It's an ingredient to a longer life and to a strong immune system. So in this lecture, we will look at how happiness leads to success and not only the other way around. And we will also look at what kinds of positive emotions there are and how we can bring more of them into our lives. Positive emotions are good for us. They let us live longer and achieve more. They build up our immune system and they help us be more creative. Positive emotions have the power to literally transform our lives. These claims seem very lurid and too good to be true. But let's just together look at how we know about the positive impact of positive emotions. Some researchers go quite far in order to prove that their theories are right. One of those studies went like this. The researchers invited a few hundred men and women into a hotel for a week. The men and women were infected with a cold virus and held in quarantine for the rest of the week. And what the researchers did then, every day, was to collect the tissues the people used in dedicated baskets and weigh the amount of mucus in them. Well, you can say that these psychologists went out of their way to see what happened. The result of the study was that the people who were happier before the study recovered faster than the others. This is quite bulletproof proof for the power of positive emotions and for the effect of positive emotions on our immune system. Probably the most influential and mind-blowing study that's ever been done demonstrating the power of positive emotions involved nuns. It started about 80 years ago in the 1930s. Back then, a number of nuns were asked to write autobiographical sketches about themselves. That was just before they entered into the convent. And then, about 70 years later, psychologists went back to these diary entries and analyzed them. They wanted to find out if what these 20-year-old nuns wrote in their diaries could predict how the rest of their lives turned out. In particular, they were interested in predictors of longevity. First, they looked at how complex the sentences were. an indicator for their intelligence. They also looked at where the nuns lived. And then they looked at how much they expressed their beliefs in God, measuring their devoutness. It turned out that none of these factors had an impact on how long the nuns went on to live. But there was one factor which did have an impact, a very significant impact. The nuns, whose journal entries had more positive content, lived nearly 10 years longer than the nuns whose entries were more negative or neutral. In particular, the researchers went on and compared the most positive 20% with the most negative 20%. And here's the difference. Here you can see how the researchers compared the happiest and the unhappiest group of the nuns. More than 90% of the happiest group of nuns were still alive at the age of 85, and at the age of 94, more than 50%. If you compare them to the unhappiest group, not even 40% were alive at the age of 85, let alone at the age of 94, when not even 10% made it. Clearly, those nuns who were happiest at the age of 20 were not happier because they knew they would live longer. Their superior health and their longer life could only be a result of their happiness and not the cause. So if you're asked, can it be that being happier adds to the years of your life? Then the answer is that it certainly seems so. In addition to improving our health, positive emotions have a significant, very interesting impact on our brain. To understand this, it is helpful to first understand how negative emotions work. The traditional example to understand how negative emotions work is to look at our ancestors in prehistoric times. They felt fear or anger in response to a threat, like a wild animal that was about to attack them. This triggered what we call the fight or flight or freeze response, responsible for our survival at times of danger. In these situations, the brain had only 3 options to choose from. First, they could fight the animal. And secondly, they could try to run away as fast as possible. And the third, which is not here on the slide because it's much less talked about in research and in general, is that they could pretend to be dead. That would be freezing. So in the face of danger, we respond to threats either by gathering our energy for fight or flight, or by freezing in helplessness, collapsing in the face of an overwhelming situation. Speaking scientifically, those negative emotions limit our thought-action repertoire, meaning emotions like fear and anger close our minds and close our hearts. They limit our brain to only a few possible actions. Positive emotions, however, have a different function. Instead of narrowing down the possibilities available to us, they open our brains and our hearts up to new possibilities. This is explained by a very famous theory called broaden and build theory. Positive emotions broaden our mind. They help us be more creative and think outside the box. We become more open to new experiences, and positive emotions also enable us to zoom out of a particular situation and consider and think of alternative solutions. And even more, positive emotions flood our brain with dopamine and serotonin. Those are chemicals that not only make us feel good, but also make our brain function at higher levels. This is the build part of the theory. Positive emotions help us organize new information and remember old information. They enable us to build new connections in our brain. And then, what this does for us in the long run is to transform us for the better. Positive emotions allow us to discover and build new skills, new friendships, and new knowledge. Here on this slide, you can see an overview of how this process works. At the beginning, we feel positive emotions. Then, what these positive emotions do, they broaden our momentary thought and action repertoires. That means they broaden our brain up to new possibilities, new thoughts, new, more creative ideas. And this builds our personal resources. That builds our friendships, that builds our knowledge, and that builds our skills. And then at the end, this leads to transformation. It transforms people and produces an upward spiral. And this process is responsible for the fact that happiness actually leads to success and is not only an outcome of success. Meaning that the way we look at success usually is kind of flawed, because it's not being successful in order to be happy. It's much more being happy and then be successful, because positive emotions have such a powerful impact on us. Feeling good can take various different forms. Up to now, I was always referring to positive emotions in general, but we can get more specific, and that's why Dr. Barbara Fredrickson came up with this list of 10 positive emotions. The first one here is joy. Joy happens in an instant. It's a perfect moment captured when all is just exactly as it should be. Think of a wonderful holiday morning with the family. Think of an unexpected present that makes you feel good, or seeing the first smile on your infant's face. The second one here on the list is pride. Have you ever done something really well that took time and effort? Maybe you reached a goal you never thought you would be able to reach. If so, then pat yourself on the back and be proud of it. Stand back and take a deep breath and let it in, because you earned it. The third one here on this list is interest. Interest is a state that calls our attention to something new that inspires or fascinates us. Like a shiny new toy or something that captures our imagination. Interest is alive and it's invigorating. Interest wakes us up and leaves us wanting more. Love encompasses all of those emotions that you see here and is experienced if we share one of these emotions with another person. When we experience love, our bodies are flooded with feel-good hormones that reduce our stress and even lengthen our life. The next on the list is serenity. It's a mellow, relaxed, and sustained version of joy. Serenity is peacefulness and comes on a cloudless day when you realize there's nothing that you have to do. It's indulging in a favorite luxury and being mindful enough to take it in. The next one is inspiration. Inspiration is felt in a moment that touches our heart and nearly takes our breath away. Ask yourself, what are the things in your life that inspire you? Forgiveness is something that is felt if we accept something that another person has done wrong to us. It is the positive emotion that we feel if we forgive another person. Awe is when you feel overwhelmed by greatness. Awe is triggered when we see the vastness of nature or the cosmos. Take a moment to think of if you had a moment of awe lately. Amusement comes up in these delightful surprises that make us laugh. It's those unexpected moments that interrupt our focus and crack us up. Have you had an amusement in your life recently? Barbara Fredrickson says about hope that unlike other emotions that arise out of our comfort and safety, hope springs out of our dire circumstances. Deep within the core of hope is the belief that things can change, that things can get better, and that possibilities exist. Hope sustains us and motivates us to turn things around. Now that we learned about these 10 positive emotions that exist, we will take a closer look at how we can cultivate more of these positive emotions. I'll go over some simple things that you can start engaging in right away. Some of those might seem like common sense, and it's true, they are common sense. But as Voltaire said, common sense is not that common. And we actually tend to forget what is so obvious to us if we really think about it. If we do this regularly, those actions can have a significant impact on our well-being and on our health. The first one of these is a writing exercise, which is about writing about intense positive experiences. It involves thinking about the most wonderful experiences in your life, the happiest moment, the most ecstatic moments, moments of rapture, perhaps being in love, or from listening to music, or suddenly being hit by a book or a painting or by a song. Choose one of such experiences and write about it. Try to imagine yourself at that very moment, including all the feelings and emotions that are associated with this experience. And then write about this experience. Write about it in as much detail as possible, trying to include the feelings, thoughts, and emotions that were present at this time. Find more clear instructions in the additional resources. The good thing about this exercise is that it has not only been shown to improve your mood, but even to improve your physical health. This next exercise is as simple as it can get. Go outside and enjoy nature. It seemed almost too simple and too obvious for me to mention it, but it's, again, easy to forget. Go outside in good weather, ideally somewhere in nature. Don't underestimate the immense impact that nature can have on our body and on our mind. Science is just beginning to understand it, and research shows that we have an innate connection to nature. One study, for example, found that when you're in a hospital, you recover faster if you can see greenery from your window. Just the simple fact that you can see nature from your window makes you recover faster. And if you just take a few moments to look at the picture on the slides here, you might find that even just seeing those pictures can have a positive effect on our body and our well-being. An impressive amount of research backs up the effectiveness of this next suggestion I'm having for you. If you dedicate 1 day a month to doing random acts of kindness throughout your day, deliberately and consciously, you will see what kind of effect it can have on your well-being. They need not be grand gestures. Simple things like paying for someone's coffee or smiling at everyone you meet. Do what feels authentic and works for you. Kindness is linked to increased feelings of fulfillment and pleasure, and research has shown that it's also good for our heart and can even slow our aging process. And most importantly, it's a wonderful thing to do because it literally multiplies happiness. It does not only affect you, but everybody you are kind to as well. If we really want to make use of this course, we have to understand how we can best change our behavior. Because the goal of this course is to make sustainable long-term change, and not just change for a few days or maybe a few weeks only. In the first part of the lecture, we will answer the question of if it is at all possible to bring about long-term sustainable change, and we will look at the underlying mechanisms there. We will learn about neuroplasticity and how London cab drivers and sea gypsies have transformed, revolutionized our understanding of the brain. By understanding how our brain works, we will see how we can gradually transform it. And then, in the second part of this lecture, we will see that even though change is certainly possible, it is also hard. And that relying solely on willpower is mostly a flawed strategy. The key lies in building positive habits, and we'll spend the rest of the lecture looking at how we can build those habits. It has long been thought that our brain and who we are is fixed after our infancy. That means that no matter what we do, the brain essentially stays the same. You were born with certain types of genes. You maybe had some early childhood experiences that still had an effect on you, but that was it. From then on, you were bound to fluctuate around the same level. You were either introverted or extroverted. you were either a more happy type of person or more melancholic, more unhappy kind of person. Thankfully, this was proven wrong not too long ago. It is actually quite far from the truth. Well, otherwise, the goal of this course, to create positive long-term change, would be rather cynical. At the end of the last century, scientists started to notice that the brain actually does change. And this ability of the brain to change is what's called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity stands for the remarkable capacity of the brain to change itself. The brain is actually able to change throughout our lifetime. Even when you're 90 years old, your brain changes. It still forms new connections. One of the famous groundbreaking studies that showed scientists that the brain actually does change throughout life was the London cab driver study. For everybody who has ever been to London, it is quite clear that it's a hard to navigate city. London cab drivers famously have to take a navigational test before they are permitted to cab around in London. Every black cab driver in central London has to have what's called the knowledge, a memorized map of the capital, including 25,000 streets and thousands of landmarks. It's a brutal learning process that can take 3 to 4 years to complete with a final test. So when researchers looked at the spatial memory parts in the cab drivers' brains, they found that these parts are significantly larger than the ones of normal people. What this implied was previously unimaginable, that the spatial part of the brain can grow as a result of the many hours studying the map of London. But the brain can do even more. Sea gypsies, for example, are nomadic people who live in a cluster of tropical islands. They spend most of their lives in boats on the open sea, and they can see clearly underwater in great depths because they learn to control the shape of their lenses and the size of their pupils. Most of us normal people can't do that, and pupil adjustment has been considered to be a fixed, innate reflex. However, in a study, Swedish children were able to learn this trick. Their brains responded to the training. This is mind-blowing. Researchers all of a sudden began to realize that our brain is actually much more powerful than we thought for such a long time. It is actually able to change itself constantly. Let's see how the brain works. This is inside our brain. Here we see a picture showing a neuron and its many pathways leading away from it to other neurons. There are about 100 trillion neurons, 100 trillion connections in the brain. Some are thin and some are much thicker. You can also see this in this picture here. And every time we do something or think something, a specific pattern of neuron fires. And every time a specific pattern of neurons fires, the connections grow. A great example to think about it is thinking of a stream. Just like a stream, every time water passes, the stream gets a little bit wider. And the more water passes, meaning the more often a new neural connection is made, the wider the stream grows. When a new connection is created, for example, you learn how to play an instrument, the connection is very weak. It takes time to move the right fingers and it requires you to consciously control the movements. But as you keep practicing, the neural pathways strengthen. Like a stream that grows, our neural pathway grows. And the more often you practice, the better you get. And the neural pathways turn from a stream to a river. Unfortunately, the same is true if we stop practicing. Let's say I ignore my instrument for a year. Some of the neural pathways will have grown thinner. Just like a river that lacks water, the pathways weaken again. New pathways or connections in our brain can be created at any point in our lives. It doesn't matter if we're 5 years old or if we're 90 years old. Neurons develop and grow throughout our lives. So since those early studies that I told you about before, other researchers have found numerous ways how we can rewire our brains to be more positive, productive, resilient, and so on. So if our thoughts, daily activities, and behaviors can change the brain, the great question becomes not if, but how change is possible. That's what we are going to explore now. So change is indeed possible. The question is how. Change is possible, but long-term change is hard. And in order to set the stage, I want to share this quote with you. It's a quote by Martin Seligman, who is the founder of the positive psychology movement and one of the most eminent psychologists at this time. And he says that the belief that we can rely on shortcuts to gratification and bypass the exercise of personal strengths and virtues is folly. It leads to legions of humanity who are depressed in the middle of great wealth and are starving to death spiritually. I shared this quote with you to once again emphasize how important it is to not only watch the video lectures, but also engage in the additional materials, because change is hard. The theme of this lecture is how to change, and this is what we are going to turn to now. One way to change is to rely on our willpower. But let me tell you a short story about willpower. A famous study done by Roy Baumeister instructed college students not to eat anything for a few hours and then come into an experiment. When the students arrived, they were given 2 plates, one full of cookies and another one with radishes. But then the researchers divided the students into 2 groups. One of the groups were told they could eat off whatever plate they wanted. The other group, however, was only allowed to eat from the radishes and not from the delicious cookies. After a certain amount of time, like 20 minutes or so, all of the participants were given some allegedly easy puzzles to solve. In truth, those puzzles are of the unsolvable kind. These get used in psychological research relatively often because you can see how long people persist in any specific task. The students in the first group, who were allowed to eat from whatever plate they wanted, persisted significantly longer than the group who had to repress their urge to eat from the delicious cookies. Those students had already used all their willpower to resist eating the cookies. They had less left to persist at the given task. Even though those 2 tasks, resisting cookies and solving puzzles, may seem unrelated, they both draw from the same easily depletable reservoir of energy. Because this reservoir of energy is what our willpower is all about. Luhr and Schwartz say that the limitation of conscious will and discipline are rooted in the fact that every demand on our self-control all draw on the same small, easily depleted reservoir of energy. What we learn from this is that relying on our willpower alone to make changes is not ideal. We need something else. Habits. In fact, we need lasting habits. The good news is that those people who really manage to make long-lasting change do not simply have higher willpower. In contrast, the people who really make it might not have strong willpower at all, but they understand that the key to implementing change is building lasting habits. A growing body of research suggests that as little as 5% of our behavior is consciously regulated. That means that we are creatures of habit. As much as 95% of what we do occurs automatically, without us even thinking about it. Most of us already have many habits in place, often outside our conscious awareness. These may range from brushing our teeth every morning and evening to planning for our day, or routines with the family and friends like eating together. We all also have some habits that are good and others that are bad for us. So what we want to build is some new good habits, and we might even get rid of some of the old habits that haven't served us well. So how then do we build new habits? Keep in mind these 4 key elements. We need specific behavior and time. We need one change at a time. We want to lower our activation energy. We want to keep the why, our reasons in mind. We'll look at them in more detail now. In the resources, you can find a worksheet, a template for an action plan to create effective change. It's a tool to put into action those 4 elements in a systematic manner. The first of those points were specific timing and precise behavior. That means if we want to build a new habit, we have to say very precisely when and what we want to do. To illustrate the importance of specifying what, when, and where we want to implement a new behavior, we'll take another look at research. In a study to increase compliance in a fitness program for non-exercising college students, researchers went and wanted college students who did not do any sports to participate in the fitness program. Their first attempt was to give them data about how exercise would significantly reduce their risk to all kinds of diseases. The participation in the program increased from 29 to 39%. But when this information was followed by a request that the students write down specifically when and where they intend to exercise, compliance went up to 91%. Similar results have been found for eating habit, instituting meditation practice, or other healthy behaviors. Change requires us to move beyond our comfort zone, and that's why it's best initiated in small, manageable doses, one change at a time. Why? Because it takes a lot of self-discipline, willpower, to start a new habit, and we don't have much of that, as we just discussed. The problem is that we often take on too much, too quickly. So that's why I ask you to focus on one significant change at a time, 2 at maximum. But more than that is too much. And how long does it take to change a habit? We usually hear numbers like 3 weeks or 30 days. But it's not as clear, and research claims that habits need up to 200 days to form. Also, it depends on what habit you want to change. But what is important is that it takes a considerable amount of time and commitment, but it can have a life-changing effect in the long term. Remember neuroplasticity? Habits are those pathways. They are like a stream, growing into a river, but it takes time. Just as water takes time to broaden and widen its pathways, our brain needs time to broaden its own connections. So give yourself at least 30 days to build a new habit before taking on a new project. It takes this much time for the neural pathways to form in your brain. And again, focus on 1 or max 2 habits at a time. If you try to tackle all the changes that are proposed to you throughout this course at once, you will end up doing none of them. As sure as night follows day, you're going to end up without any positive change, and probably also frustrated. That's why incremental change is better than ambitious failure. Success feeds on itself. The third trick to build habits effectively is to lower the activation energy needed. Let's take a closer look at that. Have you ever thought about why we so often avoid doing things that we know are good for us? Like eating more vegetables, doing more sports, something of this kind. Just like water takes the path of least resistance, also the neurons in our brain take the path of least resistance. We take the path of least resistance. And in order to overcome this resistance, we need what is called activation energy. In physics, activation energy is the initial energy that's needed to start a reaction. Similarly, activation energy is needed for us to resist succumbing to our old habits and start new, more positive and productive ones. So if we want to create new habits, let's lower the activation energy for habits that we want to adopt and raise it for those habits that we don't want to or that we want to avoid. Let me give you an example. Let's say you want to start writing a journal every night. Put a journal or a piece of paper and a pen right on your bedside table. If you want to eat more healthily, prepare healthy snacks in advance, so you just have to take them out, just like you have to take out a Snickers out of the cupboard if you want to. If eating healthily is as easy and effortless as eating a chocolate bar, you are much more likely to change your eating habits. And these are just a few simple ideas, but be creative about whatever change you want to make. How can you make it easier for us to stick to new good habits? That's the question. The fourth way to ensure that your habits are effective and that they work is to keep your why in mind. This why refers to the purpose, the reasons why you're doing something. Having a purpose and understanding why you're doing something is a powerful source to drive you. And the most powerful sources of purpose are positive rather than negative. A negative source of purpose is defensive and deficit-based. This means it's based on a threat, on a physical or psychological threat. When we feel our security or our survival at stake, emotions such as fear, anger, and even hatred can be a powerful source of energy. The problem is the cost. Negative emotions drain our energy and prompt the release of hormones that are toxic to our systems if they remain for a longer time. Purpose, fueled by the feeling of deficit, also narrows our attention and limits our possibilities. By contrast, when we are able to move from the inner experience of threat to one of a challenge, we introduce a whole new range of possibilities in our lives. Rather than reacting to fear, we can focus on what is really meaningful and precious to us. I want to refer you again to the broaden and build theory, where we talked about how positive emotions broaden our mind and build our resources. Very often, having a positive or a negative purpose is simply about how we frame our goals. For example, are we working out to avoid becoming unattractive and overweight? Or do we do it because we strive to be fit and healthy? To be more able to do other tasks or to work towards a sports competition? The difference in our attitudes can be huge simply by having a positive purpose. In addition to a positive purpose, we also want to have an intrinsic purpose. The difference between intrinsic and extrinsic purpose is just as huge as the difference between positive and negative purpose. Are we doing what we do in order to please others, or in order to get something that we feel we don't have enough of, like money or power or social status, or maybe even love? Or do we do these things because we ourselves feel that they are valuable? Clarifying purpose takes time, quiet, uninterrupted time, which is something that many of us feel we simply don't have anymore. But if we want to live a fulfilled life that's devoted to things that really matter to us deep down, we have to realize that the only way is to spend time now on questions of meaning and purpose. And for this, I want to present you a wonderful way to connect to our deepest values and our life goals. It's about finding your legacy. You have more detailed instructions in your additional materials, but I will still go over them now because it's so important. Unfortunately, it is easy to lose sight of the things that are most important to us. It seems crazy, but it's true. How often do we overreact to a family member, get angry at someone we love, or lie to somebody we really care about? There are numerous other examples, and the answers are different for every one of us. But what is true for everybody is that we tend to forget about the things that we value most. That's why the following exercise is so powerful. This is an exercise to get you in touch with the things that really matter to us, to get in touch with our true self, our values, beliefs, and aspirations. For this exercise, I recommend you take at least an hour without interruptions and any distractions. Find it in the resources. One last thought. I encourage you to try journaling on a regular basis, even outside of this course. Journaling has been found to be really beneficial for many people. On the other hand, it is a great tool to document our change efforts and help us keep track of them. And it has even more benefits. For example, it helps us deal with negative emotions or traumatic experiences. Having said this, of course it's not for everybody. Some people simply do not like to write, and that's okay too. If so, you might want to try speaking into a voice recorder, or even better, to a friend. This section is about habits. And we were just talking about creating sustainable change, and I was saying how habits are really at the very core of this sustainable change. And that's why I'm so happy to introduce you to the following few videos, which are not my own videos, but the videos of a friend of mine, Braco Bobric. He is a very renowned expert on how you can use habits to actually become happier. He has a brilliant book, and he also has a brilliant online course called Habits and Happiness. And from this online course, he was so kind to let me use a few of his lectures to give you an introduction of what habits can really do. And also, and that's what I think is the most exciting thing of all, he gave me a coupon code that you can use to actually get this course much cheaper. So please enjoy his videos. I think it's great, and you will really enjoy the course if you go for it. So there's nothing to hold us back, so let's start. This section is about habits. And we were just talking about creating sustainable change, and I was saying how habits are really at the very core of this sustainable change. And that's why I'm so happy to introduce you to the following few videos, which are not my own videos, but the videos of a friend of mine, Braco Bobric. He is a very renowned expert on how you can use habits to actually become happier. He has a brilliant book, and he also has a brilliant online course called Habits and Happiness. And from this online course, he was so kind to let me use a few of his lectures to give you an introduction of what habits can really do. And also, and that's what I think is the most exciting thing of all, he gave me a coupon code that you can use to actually get his course much cheaper. So please enjoy his videos. I think it's great, and you will really enjoy the course if you go for it. So there's nothing to hold us back, so let's start.
So what are habits? Habits are things we do automatically, thoughts we may have, or emotions, believe it or not. And all these things, emotion and thoughts, are performed automatically by our brain. So that leaves us with energy to do things that are important in our life, such as, what are you going to have for dinner tonight? What movie are you going to watch next week? And so on. So habits are performed automatically. Before we go any deeper into habits, I definitely want to mention William James, known as the father of American psychology. William James knew 100 years ago almost what we know today, and that is that habits, are performed automatically, they are ingrained in our brain, and more importantly, he talked about neuroplasticity back, 100 years ago. Now, what is neuroplasticity and what does that have to do with habits? Neuroplasticity is the science that basically proves that our brain changes every day. In the past, they were thinking it changes until we are maybe teenagers, 16, 18, 20. But now we know that our brain changes every single day until the day we die. But what happens is that it changes depending what we do. So everything that we do every single day affects our brain. And that is extremely important research and the knowledge to have, to know that everything you do, every single day changes your brain. Just to share a little bit habit story with you, a couple of years ago, I really wasn't in a good shape. I wasn't feeling so good. I had some bad stomach ache. I had some heart problem. My feet was really hurting me. I really didn't know what was going on. So recently I went to the doctor, and basically he checked everything and said, I don't know what you're doing, but whatever you're doing, keep doing it, because your health is just an outstanding. I left the doctor's office and started thinking, what is it that I'm doing differently? I wasn't taking any medication, so I really, for the problems that I had, so I really didn't understand what is it. And then it kind of clicked in me. By changing my psychology, by studying what I've been studying for years and implementing new habits, by changing my psychology, I changed my physiology. It's really incredible. And I know this can work for most of you, and this is not about just changing your physiology. Certainly, it is about doing and achieving, becoming successful in anything and everything that you want to become successful. The habit loop. Let me explain what is the habit loop and why is that so important for us to understand. So, as you see on the slide, so habit loop actually starts with the trigger. So anything that you do, habit that you have established or you're going to establish, starts with the trigger. So let's pick a habit that we all have, brushing our teeth, right? It starts with the trigger. Chances are, maybe it's first thing in the morning, as soon as you get up, you're gonna go brush your teeth. Maybe it's after you have a coffee. Maybe it's before you go to work, after you watch TV, after you read the paper, whatever it is, but there is a certain time, think about it, that you brush your teeth. Something triggers it. So what's the next thing? Next thing is routine. What's routine in this case? Easily explainable. In this case is brushing your teeth. That is your routine. And then you get something, what's called reward. So your brain actually gets rewarded. In this case, you brush your teeth, that's your routine, right? And then your reward is you feel good, you smell good, you're just kind of ready to go, right? You feel really good, so that's your reward. And then so on. The next routine comes in, next trigger, routine, reward, and so on. That's the habit loop. But here's the problem. Your brain will give you a reward regardless if your habit is good for you or bad for you. Now, that is the problem because, let me give you an example. Let's say you just love big juicy hamburger. You go to the diner, you see it on a menu, you see almost everyone around you have it. And as soon as you see this picture, you just gonna order the hamburger, right? So that coming into the diner triggered it. You order your hamburger, your routine is now to eat and enjoy, and your reward is immediately, you just feel good. That was a great burger, right? I just really feel good. So your brain is really focused to give you the immediate pleasure, right? It is not focused on the long-term goal. It is not focused that this is not good for you in the long run if you have way too many, right? This may affect your health. So that's why you have to learn some tricks to trick your brain to focus on a long-term goal. We're going to cover some tools shortly. By now, you know how trigger is important. Understanding your trigger and what triggers your habit is extremely important. Well, every morning I do my gratitude habit, my gratitude exercise. So when I take a shower, I basically express my gratitude to things, to my life, to, fingers that I have, to, I can breathe, I can take a shower, anything, any little thing, but I express my gratitude loudly while I'm taking a shower. Well, what happened is I went on vacation and I realized for 2 days I haven't done my gratitude exercise. And I started analyzing to understand why this happened. While analyzing this habit, I realized that the trigger was missing. Here's what happened. When I go and take a shower, I look at my bright yellow wall in my at home, and that kind of triggers my gratitude exercise. When I went on a vacation, there was no yellow wall, so the trigger was missing. I realized then that I need to have not a specific trigger, not something that only happened while I'm home or in a certain situation, but rather to have a generic trigger. So since then, my trigger now is as soon as I turn on the shower, the water hits my body, that is my trigger. So now, regardless if I'm home, if I'm visiting somewhere, if I'm in another country, another planet, it really doesn't matter. As long and as soon as I take a shower and the water starts hitting my body, that triggers my gratitude habit. So think about the trigger, and if it's too specific, change it. Make it generic so that you don't skip your habit.
In this lecture, we will see how our thoughts and our beliefs shape our reality and what we can do about it. It is divided into 4 classes. In the first, we will talk about how science shows us that focusing more on what works and what is going well helps us to counter our inherent negativity bias. We'll see how placing more focus on the positive rather than the negative is not being detached from reality, but it's seeing reality from a more useful angle. And then we'll finish this first class by looking at the power of being grateful for what we have. In the second class, we look at self-fulfilling prophecies and optimistic mindsets. We will see how our beliefs about ourselves shape the way who we are and who we become. And in the third and fourth class, we will understand how we can go about changing these mindsets and how we can benefit from that. Take a look at this beautiful piece of art. This is Julian Beaver, who is an artist painting 3D paintings in the streets. It's a fascinating picture, and the camera captured it perfectly. But it looked at the painting from a particular perspective, and there are many other ways to look at it too. This, for example. From this perspective, it doesn't at all look like the beautiful drawing that we just saw. It looks distorted. In this case, our perspective determines how we see the world. What can be beautiful from one angle can be totally different from another. The same is true for the perspective we take on the events and situations in our lives. We usually look at situations and interpret what other people say or do according to our own set of past experiences, culture, faith, and values. All of those help us to form our beliefs about ourselves and about others and about the world in general. Our minds are constantly trying to make sense of our world, forming judgments and opinions about every situation, event, and interaction. It is as though we are looking at the world through distorted or colored lenses. And everyone has their own personal prescription or color of their glasses. It turns out that these glasses have a very powerful impact on our thoughts and our well-being. In fact, Ed Diener, who I already quoted before, one of the leading happiness researchers in the world, said that it appears that the way people perceive the world is much more important to happiness than objective circumstances. This quote sums up decades of research on happiness, and in essence it means that if we know a person's job, their marital status, and even the state of their bank account, we still only know very little about how happy he or she is. What we need to know is if a person is a benefit finder or a fault finder. That means if a person focuses more on the positive or on the negative. The benefit and the fault finder are two archetypes that have been introduced by Tal Ben-Shahar who taught positive psychology at the University of Harvard a few years ago. And these two archetypes capture in many ways how we can create our reality, how our perspective creates our reality. Let's take a look at the first one, the fault finder. A fault finder always focuses on things that don't work, on problems and things that are not going well. Thoreau says that the fault finder will find faults even in paradise. The problem here is that we tend to take our perceptions of the world for the reality. And fault finders really believe that the unfavorable reality is out there, independent of what we think or feel. For a fault finder, no matter what they do, they always end up with a careless partner or a miserable job. No matter where they look, things always seem to go wrong for them. The typical example is looking at the glass as half empty. But there is also a way of looking at the glass as half full. And this is what the benefit finder does. The benefit finder focuses on the positive, focuses on what works. A benefit finder sees the things that are going well, and he sees the strengths of others rather than their weaknesses and their faults. A great example is Nelson Mandela. He spent 27 years captured by an oppressive regime. And when he was asked, after he came out of prison, how he was able to come out of prison with such an open, loving heart, his response was that, well, he said, "It has been a great tragedy to spend the best years of my life in prison. But only because I was in prison for 27 years, I was able to transform myself and my thinking. Because prison gave me the time to sit down and think, and that's something that you usually do not have in our normal life." So even after 27 years in prison, he was able to look at the positive side of his being captured. And this is a perfect example for the difference between a benefit finder and the fault finder. In the resources, I added a link to a video about the oldest Holocaust survivor who is still alive. And this old lady exemplifies in a remarkable way what it means to be a benefit finder. I very strongly encourage you to take a look. It's really breathtaking. So to round up this distinction between the benefit and the fault finder, I want to once again stress that nobody is absolutely one extreme or the other. We all exist on the continuum. We are all somewhere along the line in between the two extremes. So what I advocate now is to move from fault finding more towards benefit finding, because it has a lot of benefits, and we'll see more about that soon. When it comes to benefit and fault finding, we humans have an inherent disadvantage that has been given to us by evolution. It is called the negativity bias. What this means is that we unconsciously seek out negative information and are also more affected by this negative information. We react more strongly to negative life events and negative feedback. We react more strongly to losing something than to gaining something. And this had evolutionary use for us. We had to be more alert to its dangers, because one mistake could mean our death. Today we still have this negativity bias. It's ingrained in us by evolution. The problem is that it has become maladaptive in today's world. Our life is hardly ever threatened anymore, but still we are often rewarded for noticing the problems that need solving and the stresses that need to be managed. Sometimes this can indeed be very useful, but the problem is that we get stuck in this pattern. We build habits of focusing on the negative. We build habits of focusing on faults rather than benefits. And there's also neurological evidence for that. One area of the brain used for the negativity bias is the amygdala. It is these two almond-shaped areas of the brain. And this is a specific area that uses about 2/3 of its neurons searching for negative experiences, for negative information in our environment. And even more important, the amygdala is the most important brain area when it comes to negative emotions. And it's a really powerful brain area, and it impacts lots of what we do and lots of what we remember. One example for the negativity bias in our amygdala is that negative events and experiences get stored in memory almost immediately. On the other side, positive experiences have to be held in awareness for more than 12 seconds in order to transfer from short-term to long-term memory. With all the information we just heard about benefit and fault finding and negativity bias, the question becomes that is benefit finding about being detached from reality? Is it about wishful thinking and dreaming? And the answer is no, that it's actually the fault finder who is detached, because the fault finder misses out on most of the good things, and most on the things around him that are working well. Stavros and Torres phrase it like this: we see what we look for, and we miss much of what we are not looking for, even though it is there. Our experience of the world is heavily influenced by where we place our attention. And even more, being a constant fault finder comes with great costs. Fault finders are less creative, are more prone to depression, and have higher stress levels. Maybe even more importantly, they are considerably less happy than their benefit-finding peers. The issue also is that some of us have to become fault finders due to our jobs. Lawyers and tax auditors, for example, are trained throughout their lives to look for errors and flaws in others' arguments. That's invaluable for them to do a good job, but it comes with very high costs. Lawyers are among the professions most prone to depression, even though their income and status is high. Their professional habit of fault-finding spreads to their private lives as well. Their brains get stuck in negative patterns, always on the lookout for flaws and errors. The reason is that our brain gets better and better at what we repeatedly do. Think back to when we talked about neuroplasticity, and we talked about the water that shapes its pathways. Our brain does not differentiate between pathways used at work and pathways used in our private life. It's the same pathways, it's the same brain. So if in one part of our lives we are needed to look at negative things, this also permeates the rest of our lives because we use the same pathways. For people in this position, it's even more important to retrain their brain because they're even more prone to the negative effects of being a fault finder. I want to finish off with one caveat that's very important here. Benefit finding is not about ignoring the problems that exist. Rather, it is about both the good sides and the opportunities, as well as the problems and the threats. We need to see both, but we also need to be aware that we are inherently biased towards placing more attention on the negative. And in order to account for this negativity bias, and to see reality as it really is, and not the distorted version of it, we need to train ourselves to become more of a benefit finder. And this is what we're going to do now. As we saw when we talked about change in neuroplasticity, we are able to rewire our brain by doing continuous exercises to, over time, build new pathways, new connections in our brain, and become more of a benefit finder. As Martin Seligman, one of the founding fathers of positive psychology, put it, habits of thinking need not be forever. One of the most significant findings in psychology in the last 20 years is that individuals can choose the way they think. One such proven exercise is what is called the 3 good things exercise.
It requires us to make it a habit to sit down maybe on Sundays and write down 3 good things that happened through the week. Or maybe even 3 times a week, sit down in the evening and think about what happened throughout the day that was good, that was positive. Or you sit down in the evening with your partner and your family during dinner and tell each other about 3 good things that have happened throughout the day. It doesn't really matter when and how you do it, as long as you do it regularly. I encourage you to use the personal reflection journal for these exercises. But as always, if we want to create lasting change, we have to take consistent action. Make it a habit. Another way to become more of a benefit finder and more happy in general is to bring more gratitude to our lives. Remember when we talked about the myths of happiness? We also talked about the hedonic treadmill. The hedonic treadmill, the phenomenon that occurs because we always adapt to the circumstances we are currently in and then always set higher goals and want more. One way to step off this hedonic treadmill is to start appreciating what you already have, because it's so easy for us to overlook. It may seem very simple, but it can be very powerful, and it has been proven to be very powerful in numerous research studies. Simple acts of gratitude don't cost you much, especially once you get over the initial discomfort some of us feel when we thank others. But they can make a huge difference. There's a lot of convincing research on the power of gratitude, and especially on the positive effects of keeping a regular gratitude journal. A researcher called Emmons points to his research and also the research of others that shows that translating thoughts into concrete language, doesn't matter if you say it or write it, has advantages over simply thinking. It makes us more aware of them and deepens their emotional impact. And that's why writing in a journal can be so much more powerful than simply thinking about something. So what I encourage you is to make it a regular practice to write down what you're grateful for. Keeping this journal is about getting ourselves to pay attention to all the good things in our lives, to all the good things that we usually take for granted. If you decide to write a gratitude journal, here are 5 tips that have shown to make writing this gratitude journal and gratitude in general more effective. The first one is to go for detail. It's better to look at 1, 2, or 3 things in particular and elaborate on them in detail than writing a superficial list of many things. The second tip is get personal. Focus on the people to whom you're grateful for, rather than only for the things for which you're grateful for. Another very effective way to stimulate gratitude is to reflect on your life and how it would be different without certain things, without certain blessings. For example, what if I didn't have my loving wife or husband? Or what if I didn't have this comfortable bed? The fourth one is to try and record events that were unexpected and surprising, because these elicit stronger feelings of gratitude. And the fifth one, I already mentioned before, is don't overdo it. Writing occasionally has been shown to be beneficial, but writing every day makes us adapt to gratitude. So we are also able to adapt to gratitude, so that's why we don't want to overdo it. Do it once a week, maybe twice a week, and see how it fits into your life and how you like it. Of course, there is no right way to do it, and you don't need to buy a fancy personal journal to record your entries, or worry about spelling or grammar. The important thing is to establish the habit of paying attention to gratitude-inspiring events. Another thing that you can try is to share your gratitude. This can be very powerful. When you're thankful for something that another person did for you, share your gratitude with them. Let them know what they did for you and that you're grateful for it, and maybe even why you appreciate it. You can write them an email or simply call them, or even do it in person. By sharing your gratitude, It's not only you who benefit from it, but also the people you're grateful for. It is a powerful way to also affect the people around you in a positive way. Let me round up this lecture. The essence of what we talked here is that our thoughts create our world. Where we place our attention on matters. We have the choice to place our attention on what is good or what is bad. And this in turn creates our reality. And we can break out of this. There are exercises that help us cultivate being more of a benefit finder, help us cultivate to look more on the bright side and not neglect it. This session is called Beliefs as Self-Fulfilling Prophecies and the Optimistic Mindset. In the last section, we looked at how our thoughts shape our subjective reality, our feelings, and how we can perceive the same thing from different perspectives. But our thoughts not only change our individual, subjective reality, but they can even change the objective reality. I will tell you how. Some decades ago, psychology regarded optimism with some suspicion. It was anxious that it could encourage a fool's paradise approach to life. The fear was that we humans wouldn't be equipped to face life's challenges and hardships if we lived with our heads in the clouds, deluding ourselves that life was a bed of roses. Early works considered optimism naivety or denial, and in the 1970s, optimism was even considered a psychological deficit. And then Robert Rosenthal came along. Robert Rosenthal became famous because of his landmark study in psychology. What he did was he went into random schools and had all the pupils take a test to find the students with the highest potential. Then he went ahead and told the teachers about the students who are most likely to make significant progress through this year. The actual test was a regular IQ test, and in reality, the high potential students were picked completely randomly. That means the outcome of this test was fake. The teachers were not allowed to tell the pupils or anybody else, and they were not given any additional instructions. After a year, the researchers went back to the school and looked how the students were doing. And what Robert Rosenthal found when he came back after this year were pretty much mind-blowing results. Those students who had been randomly labeled high potentials improved not only their grades, but also their IQ levels, even in the long term, and significantly more than their peers. IQ was up till then something that most people thought of as something that's fixed, something that we are born with. And they were able to improve it just because their teachers believed them to improve. And here's the explanation for this. The teachers' beliefs were self-fulfilling prophecies. Self-fulfilling prophecies are, in psychology, beliefs that come true because we are acting as if they are already true. If some of you have heard about the book The Secret, in this book, it's pretty famous, it's been called The Law of Attraction. And it's a book that's coming from the New Age movement, but there's really nothing mystical about it. Our expectation that we will see a particular outcome changes our behavior, which then shapes the way others see us. And in turn, others provide us with certain kind of feedback, and that reinforces our original belief then. And so on and so on. It's an upward spiral. And the same can be a downward spiral if it's a negative belief. If we believe somebody is incapable of improving or incapable of doing math. Here's how Robert Rosenthal explains the study mechanisms. He says that in a very short time, the teachers began to treat those allegedly high potentials differently than the other kids. Those kids began to think of themselves differently, and in the end, they actually performed better than the other kids. The children were transformed simply by the positive expectations of the teacher. And as I just said, unfortunately the same thing has also been proven true when teachers think of certain kids negatively. So how does this self-fulfilling prophecy apply to our lives? Let's say, for example, that I'm going to a party where I don't know many people. If I believe I don't make a good first impression, or I worry that nobody will talk to me, I will probably enter the party acting awkward, anxious, and kind of standoff. And then, people are likely to interact with me with less enthusiasm, or they may ignore me. And this then confirms my belief that I'm not good with people I don't know. On the other hand, if I enter the party believing that I'm good with people I don't know, and expecting to make new friends, then I'm much more likely to be outgoing, engaging, and if somebody in fact doesn't like me, I'm much more likely to not take it personally. As a result, people will likely respond amiable to my friendliness, and I indeed make new friends. So if you ask yourself if this is the power of positive thinking, then the answer is yes and no, because it's actually not that simple. The optimistic mindset is a thinking pattern that enables us to benefit from self-fulfilling prophecies. But there's a problem. It's called the Stockdale paradox. Admiral Stockdale was a high-ranking American military who was caught and tortured during the Vietnam War. In the book Good to Great, James Collins talks to Stockdale and looks at his coping strategy and asks him about this period in his life. Here's what Admiral Stockdale said. He said, "I never lost faith in the end of the story. I never doubted not only that I would get out, but also that I would prevail in the end and turn the experience into the defining event of my life, which in retrospect I would not trade." And then James Collins, the author of Good to Great, asked him, who didn't make it out of Vietnam? And Stockdale replied, "Oh, that's easy. The optimists. They were the ones who said, we're going to be out by Christmas. And Christmas would come and Christmas would go. And then they'd say, we're going to be out by Easter. And Easter would come and Easter would go. And then Thanksgiving. And then it would be Christmas again. And so on. And then, he said, they died of a broken heart." Stockdale then added that this is the very important lesson he learned. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. And this is what Collins calls the Stockdale paradox. Abraham Maslow, one of the main humanistic psychologists, said the same thing. He said that false optimism sooner or later means He said that false optimism sooner or later means disillusionment, anger, and hopelessness. It is important that our beliefs are grounded in reality, just as Maslow and Stockdale said. Clearly, blind optimism that's detached from reality, has to be avoided, and it's not beneficial. But practical optimism that's grounded in reality and its benefits are now widely established in psychology in general. The question then becomes, well, when should I use the optimistic mindset? And here's when. If you're in an achievement situation, use optimism, like getting a promotion or selling something, writing a difficult report, or winning a game. Secondly, if you're concerned about how you will feel in the future, use optimism. And thirdly, if you want to lead, if you want to inspire others, if you want people to vote for you, then use optimism. For the time when not to use optimism, there's a very easy rule of thumb, and that is, do not use an optimistic mindset when the cost of failure is high. The fundamental guideline for not deploying optimism is to ask whether the cost of failure is high in a particular situation. If the cost of failure is high, optimism is simply the wrong strategy. You do not want pilots in your plane to be optimistic that nothing's going to happen. We want them to be cautious. That's why we all get asked to turn off our phones on the plane, even though it's highly unlikely that there is any effect on the plane's instrument. We want them to be cautious, because here the cost of failure is high. It's death, or at least a catastrophe. Using techniques that minimize those costs is inappropriate. On the other hand, if the cost of failure is low, use optimism. The sales agent deciding whether to make one more call or not loses only his time when he fails. So, the more optimistic salesperson have to be found to way outperform their peers. Because this course is to be based on science, I also want to tell you why this works. Why it is that pessimists and optimists fare differently, and why optimism is better. How do self-fulfilling prophecies work? As we just saw, optimists believe that they can do it. It's about their belief, it's about their mindset. What you believe and what you expect to happen influences our future. The first explanation is that those people are more motivated. They have higher motivation. Ask yourself, in which situations are you more motivated? When you're confident or when you're less confident? Most certainly, your motivation is higher if you feel confident about succeeding. When you feel more confident, you set more challenging goals and you are higher motivated to reach those goals. It's very easy, but that's how it works. The second explanation is that optimists try harder. They are more persistent. They expect good things to happen, so they don't give up easily when they face setbacks. Remember what Admiral Stockdale said? He said to never lose faith that you will prevail in the end. And this faith that you will prevail in the end helps you look at failures and setbacks as a way of, this is just a temporary setback. This is just something to overcome. If I persist, in the end, I will succeed. I will make it. In the next part of the class, when we talk more about mindsets, you will see how the way we perceive failure and setbacks can have tremendous impact on our whole life. And the third reason why optimistic beliefs turn into reality is captured by self-perception theory. One of my favorite ideas is that people become what they do. Self-perception theory turns common wisdom on its head. Common wisdom says that people act the way they do because of their personality traits and their attitudes, right? They return a lost wallet because they are honest, and they recycle the trash because they care about the environment. But research supporting self-perception theory suggests that the reverse also holds true. If we return a lost wallet, we see ourselves returning it, and we see ourselves as honest people. That means, if we track the recycling bin to the trash, we infer that we really care about the environment. We unconsciously look at our behavior to figure out who we are. This is one of my favorite ideas in psychology. It's the idea that people become what they do. They become what they do because they look at their behavior and think, ooh, I must be this kind of person. So somebody who recycles the trash, you look at yourself, you look at your behavior and think, I must be a person who cares about the environment. I must be an honest person because I just returned this wallet. Obviously, we hardly ever think these thoughts consciously. These are unconscious mechanisms. But that is also why they are so powerful. So for these three reasons, we are higher motivated, we are more persistent, and we learn about ourselves by looking at our behavior. This is how self-fulfilling prophecies and the optimistic beliefs that we hold become our reality. The last class in this series is changing our mindsets by changing our behavior. This is the ultimate strategy. It is important to understand how our mindset affects our behavior, and we discussed this extensively in the last lecture. But ultimately, we have to change our behavior to reap the benefits of self-fulfilling prophecies, the optimistic mindset, and the growth mindset. As we saw when we looked at self-perception theory, there is one main strategy to become a more successful person: changing our behavior. We have to put ourselves on the line and leave our famous comfort zone. The idea of the comfort zone goes back to one of the classic experiments in psychology. More than 100 years ago, in 1908, two psychologists discovered that when they had mice running in a maze and giving them mild electrical shocks, they were faster to complete the maze. But when the shocks became too strong, the rats just randomly ran into every direction trying to escape. The lesson learned from this experiment is that increasing stress and arousal could help focus motivation and attention on the task, but only up to a certain point. The same has been found true for humans. If we are in a state of relative comfort, we perform at a steady level. But in order to maximize our performance and grow, we need a state of relative anxiety, a space where our stress levels are slightly higher than normal. This space is called optimal anxiety, or growth zone, and it's just outside our comfort zone. Too much anxiety and we're too stressed to be productive, and our performance drops sharply. Let me give you an example. Back in the school, we used to be nervous before exams, but if we got too nervous, that would cause problems. An optimal level of nervousness and stress can help us focus on the test and remember the information that we studied better. But too much test anxiety can have us have a blackout and we don't remember anything. This would be the panic zone. Where we want to be is the growth zone. And when we are in the growth zone, we will see that over time we are expanding our comfort zone. And the goal is to reach that optimum level so that our skills increase and we become comfortable with this new level of anxiety. Then we're in the expanded comfort zone. You'll see that as you challenge yourself, your comfort zone adjusts and what was difficult before becomes more easier as you repeat it. And as we get more used to those feelings of, let's call it, productive discomfort, it won't be so scary to try new things in the future. Of course, there are things we can do that help us step out of our comfort zone. The first thing to remember is to take one step at a time. Start small. The change process doesn't happen in one step, but in many, many small steps. You do one thing different in the right direction, and that's what behaviorists call successive approximations. One step leads to another. With each step you take, you perceive yourself as someone who does go outside your comfort zone. Remember about self-perception theory. We learn about ourselves by looking at our behavior. So if we step outside of our comfort zone, we perceive ourselves as a person who steps outside of our comfort zone. And we infer, oh, I must be a person who does this kind of things. So when you move into your growth zone by trying something new and you don't, die, it's kind of reinforcing. It's reassuring. It's encouraging. It might even help you to get in your growth zone the next time, and the next, and the next, and the next, and the next. Here I also want to remind you of neuroplasticity. When we get outside of our comfort zone, we start creating new pathways in our brain. And those pathways or connections grow stronger only over time. As we continue to go outside our comfort zone, these pathways are reinforced and these connections grow. What else can we do to make leaving our comfort zone easier? One such help is finding a role model. Because one thing we know is that people don't attempt to achieve something unless they believe it can be done. We know that people are much more likely to attempt to do things if they've seen that someone like them can do it. First, we need to know that something can be done. And then we need to know that we can do it. And role models can help us with both of these points. They are the obvious proof that some things can be done. And when you then go and bring the right mindset to your life, then you are ready to grow beyond what you could have imagined before. Speaking of the right mindset, we also have to learn to fail. Please keep in mind there is no foolproof recipe for success. That doesn't exist. And failures and setbacks will inevitably occur if we really try and move out of our comfort zone. The key is to bring a growth mindset to these failures. Seeing failures as part of the learning process. Seeing failures as learning from them, as sources of information. We will take a closer look at how to learn to fail in the last section when we talk about dealing with the negatives. We will learn how to reframe failures and how to handle them effectively. And last but not least, if you really don't feel ready yet to go outside of your comfort zone, you can try to visualize it. Visualization can be a great tool. In psychology research, it's often called mental imagery, and it's used a lot in sports. It has been proven that people can improve performance through visualizing their actions, because action and imagination often activate the same parts of our brain. When we need to learn a new physical skill, mental practice of this skill can produce the same physical changes in our motor system as the physical practice. Your brain simply doesn't know the difference. For example, researchers looked at the brains of weightlifters. They found that the patterns in their brain that are activated when they lifted hundreds of pounds were almost the same patterns as when they only imagined it. Research showed that mental practices can be almost as effective as true physical exercise, and that doing both is more effective than doing either of them. A great study done in this area brought in two groups of people. One of the groups were instructed to go to the gym. They carried out real workouts in the gym, and the other group carried out virtual workouts in their heads. The researchers found that the group who went to the gym had 30% muscle increase. And the group of people who only imagined that they were doing weight training had muscle increase almost half as much, about 15%. And this remained like this for the next 3 months. So simply by imagining that you're doing weightlifting, your muscles grow. This form of mental rehearsal has been popular since the Soviets started using it back in the 1970s. They used it in sports. Nowadays, many athletes all across the world employ this technique, and almost every world-class athlete uses visualization. The brain is getting trained for actual performance during visualization. It has been found that regular mental practices can enhance motivation, increase our confidence and our persistence, and improve our performance. All these things are relevant for achieving our best life. And in order for you to do this, I want to introduce you to a practice called Best Possible Self. It's a writing exercise, and for this exercise, you need about 20 minutes a day for 4 days. But this is again flexible, and you can do it as you please. Think about your life in the future. Imagine that everything has gone as well as it possibly could. You have worked hard and you succeeded at accomplishing all your life's goals. Think of this as the realization of all your life dreams. Think about all the aspects of your life, your home, work, relationships, leisure activities, etc., etc. Now, write about what you imagined. And before we end this lecture, I want to finish off with a final sentence. Remember that in the end, it always comes down to our actions. Visualization can be a helpful tool, but in the end, we have to take action. In this class, we look at how we can change mindsets by changing the beliefs about ourselves. Let's look at what different mindsets they are, what different mindsets people have, so that we then can go and change them. Let's first look at how we view intelligence. What do you think about this statement? Do you think it's true or not? You can learn new things, but you can't really change your basic intelligence. Again, do you think this is true, or do you think this is actually something that's not true and intelligence can be changed? If you think intelligence is fixed, then it most certainly is. It will be fixed for you. But if you think that intelligence is in fact something that you can change and that you can build up by putting effort in it and studying and learning, then you are able to increase your intelligence. This is just another version of the self-fulfilling prophecy we talked in the last class. But also, this points us towards the two different mindsets that we can have towards intelligence. One is a fixed mindset, and the other one is a growth mindset. We will take a closer look at this in turn, but let's finish off this example first. I want to prove to you that in fact, intelligence is malleable. And for this I'll share with you a quote by Alfred Binet. He is the inventor of the IQ test. He said back then in the 1920s, when he invented the IQ test, that a few modern philosophers assert that an individual's intelligence is a fixed quantity, a quantity which cannot be increased. We must protest and react against this brutal pessimism. And then he continues, with practice, training, and above all, method, we manage to increase our attention, our memory, our judgment, and literally to become more intelligent than we were before. In fact, the whole IQ test was invented to identify those kids who were currently not benefiting from the school system and help them become better. Or let's take another look at something that most of us think of as something that's given to us by birth that we either can or cannot do. Drawing. Some people seem to naturally draw well, others seem to draw poorly. So what about drawing skills? Can you draw? Do you think you could ever draw like this? As it turns out, drawing is not a magical ability that only very few of us have, and that is given to us by birth. Take a look at these examples. These before and after drawings were drawn by the same person only 5 days later. They went through a drawing course of 5 days, and that's the difference. Here, another version. Just think about this for a second. Drawing, something that people usually think is something that we either can do or cannot do, is so changeable with only 5 days of drawing training. This is the difference that it makes. That's incredible. But it's not only me and science who say that, but also one of the most famous painters of all time, Vincent van Gogh. He said, if you hear a voice within you say, you cannot paint, then by all means paint, and the voice will be silenced. He already knew what psychologists had to find out 100 years later. These two examples, intelligence and our artistic ability, lead us to an overall understanding of that there are two different mindsets to look at things. You can easily replace intelligence or artistic ability by musicality, creativity, the athletic type, or maybe some business understanding, some intuition. All these things can be looked at from two different angles, with a fixed or with a growth mindset. These two mindsets are underlying belief that we have about our qualities and even about our personalities. Let's look at the fixed mindset first. If you have a fixed mindset towards something, you believe that the qualities you have are carved in stone. Success is not about learning, but about showing talent. What you do is about winning, and not about developing and learning. People with growth mindset, on the other side, see their qualities as things that they can develop through much dedication and through effort. They believe that with experience, effort, and engagement, people can grow. The underlying understanding is that we all differ in talents, but these talents can be developed, no matter how much initial talent you have. People with a fixed mindset tend to think, I'm not athletic, I'm not good at maths, or I just can't lose weight. If you have a growth mindset, on the other hand, you think thoughts like this. If I don't try, I fail automatically. Or if you just experience the setback, you think, I'll have to work a little bit harder next time. And the reaction towards failure is, what can I learn from this mistake? Now here's why mindset matters. Our mindsets matter because they affect how we think of effort and how we respond to failure. When we are faced with failure or a challenge, people with a fixed mindset do not pay attention to learning information. They get depressed more easily. They underrepresent past successes and focus on their failures. Most importantly, they look at effort as a reflection of low talent. That means that if you have a fixed mindset, hard work means I don't get it, I'm unintelligent, I'm not natural at this. Effort means that we lack the ability, that we lack the talent. If you have a growth mindset, however, you have an understanding that it is the effort that makes success come. It is trying harder when we face a setback, and because we try harder, that's why we overcome difficulties. If you have a growth mindset, you see effort as a necessary part of success. And we have seen these ways of thinking with all kinds of geniuses all over history. It has actually been shown that the defining characteristic of geniuses is that they're persistent and put in extreme amounts of effort. People who are geniuses, or people who simply have a growth mindset, understand that it's all about learning and becoming better. Failure means we have to try new things. Failure means we have to put in more effort. So whereas the fixed mindset holds you back, the growth mindset propels you forward. Again, we can see how our own mindsets become self-fulfilling prophecies. And because it makes such a huge difference, I invite you to take this time out here with me. Take this time out and identify an area in your life where you have a fixed mindset. Where does it usually occur? And has it served you well? You can find more in the resources, but pause here and think about it for a second. In this lecture, we will talk about what I called here 3 strategies for happiness and success. These 3 are mindfulness, self-esteem, and strengths. Mindfulness rests on the insight that we only have the present moment to live in. We will look at how meditation is basically just a workout for the brain. And then we will learn about other ways to be more aware and more mindful about what's going on in our lives. The second of these strategies is self-esteem. And self-esteem is the judgment that we place upon ourselves, and it affects almost every aspect of our lives. We'll understand what it means to have high self-esteem and how we can practice it based on the 6 pillars or practices of high self-esteem. And the third class is going to look at strengths, because understanding what we're good at can transform our lives. I will argue that we have an inherent bias towards looking at our weaknesses, and we easily overlook our strengths. So then in more particular, we will look at how character strengths can be identified and used to use their benefits in our lives. How much attention do you pay to the present moment?
this very moment in time. If you take a second to notice how much attention you pay or we pay to anything, you will quickly notice that the mind is all over the place. It never sits still. We spend huge amounts of time planning and worrying about the future, and we spend also huge amounts of time thinking about the past, about what happened yesterday and who said what to you, and there's just a plethora of different things that our mind is constantly worrying about. And the present moment gets completely squeezed out among all these occupations, all these things that are going on in our mind. But the present moment at the same time is the only moment that we are ever alive in. The only moment we can ever enjoy something. The only moment that we can experience. And this is what mindfulness is about. The definition of mindfulness is what Jon Kabat-Zinn calls paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. Starting from this definition, and in order to understand mindfulness, we'll now first take a look at the opposite of mindfulness. Because we humans have a usual tendency to sleepwalk through our lives. This mode is what could be described as autopilot. We are very rarely aware of the present moment. We are most of the time on something like an autopilot. Let me give you an example so you get a better understanding of what I mean. You might be familiar with this situation. You drive home from work and you want to stop at the supermarket. But actually, you find yourself with the key in the door before you realize that you were on autopilot all the way home. You were lost in thoughts, maybe thinking about what had happened at work or what will have to be done at home. And the present experience of driving, to the supermarket for that matter, got completely squeezed out, was lost among all the thoughts that you had about work and home or any other scenarios that constantly play out in our minds. That's what's being on autopilot, and that's what's the exact opposite of mindfulness. Let's take a time out together here. Stop the video and take a few minutes to become aware of your current experience, right here and right now. Feel the sense of your body, your feet in contact with the floor, your buttocks on the chair if you're sitting. Feel your head and your shoulders. And maybe, can you feel the movement of your breath somewhere in your body? As I said, stop the video here and pay attention just for a minute or two. This was a first glimpse into mindfulness, a first glimpse into what I mean if I talk about paying attention to the present moment on purpose and without judging it. Jon Kabat-Zinn, the researcher responsible for bringing mindfulness into our field, emphasizes that mindfulness is not simply a technique, but it's a way of being, a way of living that means living in this very moment. But for our purpose, we can look at it also as a skill, because that's what it also is, a skill, and a skill that can be developed. And one of the main tools for developing mindfulness is mindfulness meditation. So in the next part of the class, we'll look at the evidence, the research that's there, that tells us how beneficial mindfulness can be if we apply it to our lives. Research into mindfulness has grown at a tremendous pace. It is proven to be effective from medicine and psychology to education, business, and leadership, and in a wide area of other fields, like helping people stop smoking and overcome depression. I said before that the main tool for developing mindfulness is mindfulness meditation. And brain research is producing hard evidence that meditation practice can literally change the way our brain works. Early studies looking at mindfulness have examined Buddhist monks. Those monks are people who practice mindfulness every day from quite early on. And brain scientists found that long-time practitioners showed brain activation on a scale that had never been seen before. Those Buddhist monks were able to generate high amounts of so-called gamma waves in our brain. These gamma waves are important for remembering and for learning. What's more, brain areas that are responsible for our happiness and positive emotions have been found to be much larger than usual. That's when psychologists and neuroscience began to understand that the brain is capable of being trained and physically modified in ways few people can imagine. Remember how neuroscientists used to believe the opposite? Before neuroplasticity was discovered, we thought that connections among brain nerve cells were fixed early in life and did not change throughout the rest of it. But that assumption was proven wrong. Nowadays, we have very convincing evidence that meditation practice can have effects on our brain the same way golf and tennis practice affects our mind and our body. So this may be great for Buddhist monks, but what about normal people? What's in it for us who cannot spend hours meditating every day? There's good news too. And to prove this, we turn to a study that was eye-opening on several levels. Two of the pioneers in the field, their names are Richard Davidson and John Kabat-Zinn, went to a big biotechnological company and trained the employees there to practice mindfulness meditation for 8 weeks. And the impact was impressive. First, it showed that just 8 weeks of mindfulness training can significantly decrease people's stress. This finding was important, but it was not all that much surprising, because after all, they called their program mindfulness-based stress reduction. But then, the researchers also took a look at the meditators' brains. Those people who had just been meditating for 8 weeks now had significantly more brain activity in the areas associated with positive emotions. Only 8 weeks. And the most fascinating finding had to do with their immune function. At the end of the 8-week study, all the participants, that means the meditators and the people who have been put on a wait list, the so-called control group, were given flu shots. And what the two researchers found then was that those people who had been meditating for 8 weeks produced significantly more antibodies to the influenza vaccine. That means that after just 8 weeks of mindfulness meditation, the meditators were clearly happier and more resistant to illnesses. That's amazing, only 8 weeks. And in fact, even newer research shows that people meditating for only 3 weeks, 20 minutes per day, already demonstrated some changes in their brains. For researchers, these outcomes were mind-blowing, because even though neuroplasticity was already discovered, nobody thought that we are such in control of the way our brain is working. One of the leading neuroscientists in the world, Professor Richard Davidson, who works very closely with the Dalai Lama, phrased it this way. This positive state is a skill that can be trained. Our findings clearly indicate that meditation can change the function of the brain in an enduring way. And somebody who should really know it phrased it like this. Meditating is like lifting weights or exercising for the mind. Anyone can be happy by simply training their brain. The person who said this was Mathieu Ricard, and he is often labeled as the happiest man alive. These two studies that I shared with you and the recent quotes were just a snapshot of some of the research in the last 20 years. Of course, there are hundreds of studies more. What's so remarkable is that mindfulness helps improve everything from attention and brain function to immunity and even skin disease. Yes, studies have even shown that meditation significantly accelerated the healing process of psoriasis, a skin condition. And if you want to get a simple, but very thorough explanation of what is really going on in the brain, here's a great explanation of Daniel Siegel. He's the author of the book Mindset and the founder of the discipline Interpersonal Neurobiology. And it's really interesting what he has to say. So I attached a link in the resources to a talk from him. It's about 20 minutes. So if you're interested in that, check it out. It's really informative. He explains how the brain works and how mindfulness influences the brain. And as I just said, he also has a wonderful book called Mindset that I recommend if you want to know more. Now we look at applying mindfulness to our lives. The exercises and practices here are meant to get you started. They are great for beginners, for getting you started to meditate. Advanced meditators may find that the next steps are missing. That's because this is not meant to be a full-fledged mindfulness course. The first exercise that we will start together is called recognizing the unsettled mind. Again, mindfulness is the deliberate intention to observe the activity of our mind in a non-judgmental way, to step back and notice whatever arises in our mind without reacting to it. The starting point for mindfulness is simply noticing what is happening in our minds right now. Let's begin by doing a simple exercise. Sit comfortably with your back straight. For a beginner, a straight back chair is probably best. Once you're sitting comfortably, simply relax and experience being where you are. Feel the pressure of your body resting on the seat and on the ground. Become aware of the space around you. Notice how you naturally become aware of sights, sounds, and other sensory stimuli. Perhaps a certain smell, or maybe a breeze brushing your skin. So this practice is very simple. Just allow yourself to be present, experiencing whatever happens. When you sit and do nothing, decide to sit and do nothing. Let your mind rest in the present moment. And simply be aware of where you are right now. You might want to stop here for a minute to do this exercise on your own. In a surprisingly short time, you may find that you're thinking about something, even though you had decided to do nothing other than notice what occurs in your senses in this moment. When you realize you are thinking, simply bring back your attention. Bring it back to the here and now, doing nothing, just observing. Rest assured, you will continue to drift off into random thoughts, worries, daydreams, or ruminations. That's normal. Every time that happens, gently bring back your attention to the here and now, doing nothing. Now that you're done with this exercise, reflect on it. You sat down, relaxed, and decided not to do anything, not to chase your thoughts, and not to get lost in imagination. But despite this decision, you probably found yourself thinking about something. What does this tell you? What does this tell us? It seems that our mind automatically pulls us away from the present moment into thinking. This habit is strong and has the power to override our decision to make progress. This is what Paul Gilbert calls the unsettled mind. And we all have it. Meditation and mindfulness is a way of settling our mind more and of training our mind to be able to live this present moment. Another way to practice mindfulness is mindful breathing. This is the very basic mindfulness meditation exercise that beginners usually start with. The practice looks something like this. You begin by sitting comfortably in a position that enables you to be both alert and relaxed. Start by taking 3 slow deep breaths, and then resume breathing naturally and bring a gentle attention to your breath and the movement of your breath. Tune in to the physical sensation of breathing, not thinking about the breath, but being with it, becoming aware of the in-breath and the out-breath.
again you will find that your mind wanders off from the breath. This is perfectly normal and not a problem. The mind naturally wanders. Just acknowledge the sensation, thought, or sound, experience it, and very gently let it go. And then bring your attention, again very gently, back to your breathing. You have detailed instructions in the resources. You can do this for any length of time. Start off doing it for just a few minutes, maybe only 2 or 3. When it comes to posture, you can really practice in any posture that you want. This can be sitting, lying down, or even standing or walking on your feet if that feels right for you. But remember that the best meditation posture allows you to be relaxed and alert at the same time. That's the most important thing. You have to be able to be relaxed and alert at the same time. For many people, this means that you have to keep your back straight. Close your eyes or keep them halfway open, whatever feels most appropriate to you. In the resources, you will also find a link to a guided meditation, a 20-minute guided meditation by Jon Kabat-Zinn. He was the researcher responsible for bringing mindfulness into the scientific realm. And it's a very good one, but it's 20 minutes, so you might want to start off doing this very easy practice for a few minutes, and then you will see where it leads you. The third mindfulness exercise that I want to present you is mindful eating. It's a very simple exercise that involves fruit, often a raisin, or maybe if you don't like raisins, a piece of chocolate, or something like that. It involves various steps, and they're also, again, outlined in the additional resources. You can do this exercise for 5 to 10 minutes or even longer if you want. Just try it out and see how it feels for you. In this last part of this class, we want to take a closer look on the challenges that arise when we're trying to establish a mindfulness practice. You may want to practice mindfulness for a few days or a week or 2 before you go through this class. It's up to you. When we set up a mindfulness practice, it helps us to think of it as a mental workout, because that's what it is. Meditation is a mental workout. We cannot stop our mind going off on thoughts that we didn't choose. But when we notice it has gone and deliberately guide it back, that's like exercising a mental muscle. So if your mind wanders like 20 times in the space of 1 minute, then you guide it back 20 times and you have done 20 units of exercise. It's like 20 sit-ups for the mind. So you do not need to worry if your mind wanders many times. Every time you guide it back, you enhance your skill of mindfulness. Also, don't be discouraged by the challenges you face. No matter how difficult your experiences, there are ways to work with them and learn with them. It is incredibly common for people to think that they are bad meditators or that everyone else can do it except them. However, almost everybody faces challenges, and that is why in this class we talk about a list of common mistakes, of common obstacles, and how we can overcome them. Of course, this list is not exhaustive, but it captures many of the common problems. The first of the challenges is restlessness. It's incredibly common to feel restlessness when we start to meditate. We start feeling the need to move. We want to get up and just do something different. Just try to be with this restless feeling without acting on it. Try to experience these feelings and thoughts as what they are, fabrications of the mind. And then settle down a little bit more. Try to feel the present moment a little bit more and try to feel your breath a little bit more. Another interesting one is sleepiness. We often find that meditating reminds us of how sleepy we actually are. If you find yourself drifting into sleep, try if you can be non-judgmental about this too. If it happens too frequently, try to adjust your posture. Try to be in a more upright position, or maybe change the time of your meditation practice. Thirdly, there's boredom. We are so caught up in our usual lives that are full of distractions that it can be hard to take all the distractions away and really be in the present moment. We start to lose interest in just sitting there and doing nothing. So here's your chance to bring curiosity to something that we take so much for granted, that we ignore most of our lives, even though it is the very basis of our lives. Our breath and our breathing. And every breath is different. So try to acknowledge this and bring more curiosity to what's happening in your body, in your mind, if you meditate. Maybe you manage to even bring curiosity to your feelings of boredom and say, that's interesting. So that's the way I feel and think about it. The fourth one is the question, am I doing it wrong? Or what am I doing here? Or when will I finally see results? See if you can let go of these fabrications of your mind and be non-judgmental about your practice. Because this is what mindfulness is. Paying attention on purpose in the present moment and in a non-judgmental way. See if you can drop this commenting voice that's constantly judging us. And see if you can move beyond the relentless judging of good and bad and useful and useless. If you have decided to give mindfulness a try, don't be discouraged and acknowledge that it is not a quick fix. It takes time. If you are in doubt, keep in mind that there is a huge amount of research demonstrating its effectiveness. The fifth one is laziness. It's easy to get too lazy to really keep up the practice. It's easy to say, I will watch TV instead. That's so much easier, so much more comfortable to do. But remember the class on making change happen. You already know how to build a habit. You already know what steps to take to make this change and set up this habit in your life. And if you decide to give mindfulness a try, definitely try to make it a habit. Just a few minutes a day and you will see where it goes. Rounding up this lecture, I want to stress again that the present moment is the only moment that we are ever alive in. And let's give it the attention it deserves. Let me start this lecture with a quote. A quote from Nathaniel Branden, who says that, apart from disturbance, whose roots are biological, I cannot think of a single psychological problem, from anxiety and depression to underachievement at school or at work, to fear of intimacy, happiness or success, to alcohol or drug abuse, to spouse battering or child molestation, to codependency and sexual disorders, to passivity and chronic aimlessness, to suicide and crimes of violence, that is not traceable, at least in part, to the problem of deficient self-esteem. Of all the judgments we pass in our life, none is as important as the one we pass on ourselves. The person who said this was Nathaniel Branden, often called the father of the self-esteem movement, and probably the first to promote a holistic understanding of self-esteem. And the definition of self-esteem that he provides is self-esteem as an integrated sum of self-confidence and self-respect. It is the conviction that one is competent to live and worthy of living. The first part of self-esteem is self-confidence. This is a feeling of competence, a feeling that we are able to face the challenges of life. And the second component is self-respect. Self-respect means we like ourselves. We feel worthy of happiness.
Or yet another way to say it is feeling competent means trusting in our own abilities, to think on our own, to make our own decisions, to learn and to cope with life. Not seeing ourselves as a victim of circumstances or the victim of the action of others. Feeling worthy means being comfortable in asserting one's thoughts, wants and needs in an appropriate manner. And the feeling that being happy and fulfilled are something that's appropriate to us. So on the other hand, if you have low self-esteem, then you feel inappropriate to life, somehow wrong as a person. People with high levels of self-esteem are more resilient. That means they bounce back more easily if they face troubles, if something bad happens to them. Also, their romantic relationships and also their relationships to their family and friends are more fulfilled because they are able to express themselves more openly. Also, people are more successful because they have high self-esteem. Beliefs are self-fulfilling prophecies. We talked about this in an earlier lecture and it is true here as well. If I believe that I am worthy and competent, if I believe in myself, then I'm much more likely to succeed. And last but not least, people with high self-esteem are also happier. But let me now address some of the common misconceptions about self-esteem. Self-esteem, first of all, is a fundamental human need. Self-esteem affects every area in our life. When we are alone, when we are with others, whether we are at home or at work, we are constantly evaluating ourselves. Researchers call self-esteem the immune system of consciousness. Researchers call self-esteem the immune system of consciousness. A healthy immune system doesn't guarantee that you'll never become ill, but it does reduce your susceptibility to illness, and it can help you recover faster if you do get sick. The same is true psychologically. People with strong self-esteem are more resilient in face of life's difficulties. It is impossible to have too much self-esteem. People who are arrogant actually show a lack of self-esteem. Those who are truly comfortable with themselves and their achievements take pleasure in being who they are. They don't need to tell the world about it. Secondly, it's not about being perfect. Perfection is an ideal no one can consistently hold up to. And failure is an important part of learning. Remember the growth mindset? We have to be willing to fail. We have to be willing to make mistakes in order to be the best we can. Tal Ben-Shahar, the professor teaching positive psychology at Harvard University, calls this giving yourself the permission to be human, because humans do fail. So we have to give ourselves the permission to do so and not be perfect. Thirdly, self-esteem is about what you think of yourself. Becoming successful, powerful, or well-liked does not automatically translate into good self-esteem. In fact, talented and powerful people who doubt their own core values are usually unable to find joy in their achievements. So keep in mind, self-esteem has only to do with what I think of myself, not what anybody else thinks of me. And lastly, self-esteem has to be grounded in reality. Just like optimism must be grounded in reality, self-esteem must be too. In fact, Nathaniel Branden says, self-esteem is the reputation we acquire with ourselves. And we build up this reputation with our actions. And in the following part of the class, we'll explore which actions to take to build up our self-esteem. Many research findings suggest that the results of self-esteem enhancement programs are very weak. Much of the evidence points to the fact that many claims are extravagant and unfounded, especially in popular culture. But why are all these self-esteem programs so ineffective? The main reason is that what determines your level of self-esteem is what you do.
Of course, it's nice to read and hear inspiring words and get an intellectual understanding of something. But it's what we do that leads to our self-esteem, not what we hear or know. Also, when we talked about change, we talked about the importance of building habits and that this is the most effective approach to change. And once we introduce behavioral change, our new behavior in turn changes our attitudes. You remember self-perception theory. If you want to improve in a specific area of life, the most effective way is to change our behavior, because we learn about ourselves by observing our behavior. In order to understand how exactly we can do that, we will take a look at the framework that Nathaniel Branden sets up. He talks about the 6 pillars that make up self-esteem, 6 practices that are important for the cultivation of self-esteem. Here they are. The first of those practices, or pillars, is called living consciously. Living consciously, in essence, means being mindful. It's what we just talked about before. Living consciously is living in a mindful manner and paying attention to what we think and what we do. The second of those pillars is self-acceptance. I also mentioned this before. Self-accepting is about being willing to experience whatever we truly think, feel and do, even if we don't like it. Facing our mistakes and learning from them, and giving ourselves the permission to be human. Self-responsibility is the third pillar of self-esteem. It's an active orientation to life, rather than a passive, victim-like orientation. Being self-responsibly means that we understand that we are responsible for our choices and our actions at every level, and that the achievement of our goals, happiness and values is also within our responsibility. Here's an example. In personal relationships, people who are most fulfilled go beyond just saying, I want this and that. They ask, what am I willing to do to get what I want? They pay attention to the quality of the time they spend with their friends and family, children and spouses. They notice whether or not communication is clear, and they acknowledge their own feelings, are sensitive to the feelings of others, and face conflicts and deal with them. Viktor Frankl, a Jewish psychologist who survived the Holocaust, said this. He said that ultimately, man should not ask what the meaning of his life is, but rather must recognize that it is he who is asked. In a word, each man is questioned by life, and he can only answer to life by answering for his own life. To life, he can only respond by being responsible. Another example for acting self-responsibly would be in business. People who succeed don't limit themselves to doing only the tasks to which they are assigned. They're constantly looking for ways to contribute outside their current job descriptions. The fourth of the pillars is self-assertiveness. And this simply means to be able to say no when it's appropriate and to say yes when this is appropriate. Self-assertiveness is about standing up for what we believe in. Living purposefully means to have clear goals, to have a purpose in what we are doing. We also talked about purpose in the Change lecture, and I refer you to the legacy exercise. Maybe revisit it to really get an understanding of what's my purpose in life, what am I here for, why am I doing the things that I'm doing. And last but not least, integrity. That's the sixth pillar of self-esteem. Integrity means that there is a match between what we say and what we do. It also means that our behavior matches our beliefs and our convictions. When we show integrity, we act in congruence with what we believe is right. Here's an example. You commit and write down to work out twice a week. And then you go and actually start working out twice a week.
because you committed to it. This is integrity. When I keep my word and follow up on what I say, that's when I communicate to myself, my words matter, I matter. On the other hand, when I communicate something, commit to doing something, and don't follow up on what I said, then I'm essentially saying to myself, what I say is not important. It doesn't matter. I do not matter. On the other hand, when I keep my word and I follow up on what I say, that's when I communicate to myself, my words matter. I matter. The principal exercise to build self-esteem, it is also developed by Nathaniel Branden, is what is called sentence stems completion exercise. The exercise consists of sentence stems, such as, if I live more self-assertively today, ... and requires us to create 5 to 10 endings to this sentence. This simple exercise rests on the insight that we all have more knowledge than what is consciously available to us. It's a tool to access and activate those hidden inner resources. And this in turn helps us change our behavior. You will find a detailed outline in the additional resources. Here's the quick roundup of this lecture. Self-esteem is a deep conviction that we have a right to be happy and that we are competent in thinking, learning, and making appropriate decisions. It has to be grounded in reality and doesn't rely on comparison to others. It simply is the joy in one's own being. Once upon a time, there was a rabbit who went to animal school. He did great at running and great at jumping, but climbing wasn't that good. Flying wasn't even a possibility, and swimming not only terrified and nearly drowned him, but it humiliated him in front of all the other animals. So he went home, hoping his parents would understand and help. But they said he had to get a diploma. So the next day he went to talk to the guidance counselor. The counselor diagnosed that he didn't like school because he wasn't doing well in swimming. And so she arranged for him not to go to running anymore. After all, he was doing fine there. Instead, he had to take 2 periods of swimming. This short story illustrates a point. We are too focused on weaknesses. Time and energy spent trying to improve our weaknesses could far more productively be focused on maximizing a strength. We should just manage weaknesses, not try to overcome them, because it is our strengths through which we can best contribute to the world, and that will bring us our greatest satisfaction. So one of the most important contributions of positive psychology is a focus on our strengths. Peter Drucker, one of the most famous managers and leaders of the 20th century, said a person can perform only from strength. One cannot build performance on weakness, let alone something one cannot do at all. The strengths approach focuses on what is right, on what is working, and on what is strong. Strengths are part of our basic human nature. Everybody has strengths. Our areas of greatest potential are the areas of our greatest strengths. Fixing weaknesses alone is not enough. We also have to cultivate our strengths. And last but not least, using a strength is the smallest thing we can do to make the biggest difference. When we are using our strengths, we are more authentic and energized. We have higher levels of well-being and fulfillment, and we are more likely to achieve our goals and deliver better performance. Unfortunately, as the short story at the beginning illustrated, our usual focus lies on our weaknesses and not on our strengths. In the workplace, for example, the usual practice is to look at your weaknesses and find ways to work on them. Just remember again, our inherent negativity bias makes us focus on the things that are wrong, and we tend to miss out on what is actually good and working. Whether we focus on strengths or on weaknesses, one point that we already mentioned before comes true again. What we focus on determines how we see the world. We can decide to look at what is not working, that will be the fault finder, or we can choose to look at what's working and try to see things as a benefit finder. Let's take a time out here and do some benefit finding with yourself. What are your strengths? A simple question, but it is one that we often find surprisingly difficult to answer. It often seems much easier to find our weaknesses. Stop the video here for a minute and just write down what you think are your strengths. In the resources, you can find some more strategies to discover your strengths. You have various options, and there are 3 major frameworks out there that help you discover them more systematically. For now, here in the video, we will focus on character strengths. We do this because it's the only framework that's freely available, and you can take it without any problems, and it's completely free. Psychiatrists and clinical psychologists share a common Bible. It is called the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Illnesses. It's a great big book that provides a vocabulary for everybody who's working on mental illnesses. It provides a classification of all the things that can go wrong with people. All the symptoms of schizophrenia, personality disorders, or psychopaths are all described in detail and allows everybody who's working with them professionally to measure what is wrong with a person. But nothing similar to that existed for the positive side of human beings. That is why Chris Peterson and Marty Seligman, 2 of the founding fathers of positive psychology, have come up with what they called Inventory of Strengths. It is the best known strengths framework in positive psychology and tries to compile the wisdom of thousands of years of spiritual and philosophical traditions. The 2 psychologists went out and studied all the classic wisdom texts, philosophers and religious traditions like the Bible, the Bushido Samurai Code, the Bhagavad Gita, and so on and so on. The result was a framework made up of 24 universal character strengths, such as love, courage, and humility. Let's take a closer look. What they learned was that they all shared 6 common virtues: wisdom, courage, love or humanity, temperance, justice, and spirituality or transcendence. What they said is that if we want to be happy, we have to figure out how to put these 6 virtues into actions. And the way we put them into action is by applying our character strengths. The virtue of wisdom can be achieved through these 5 character strengths: love of learning, perspective, curiosity, open-mindedness, and creativity. In order to find out what your character strengths are, you can take the basic online assessment for free and find out more about your top strengths, which are also called your signature strengths. These are those strengths that are most core to who we are as human beings. They are very easy and natural to us to express, and also our friends and family will be able to see them in us. A quick side note here: if you want to take a look at another strengths framework, check out the Realize 2 or the Strengths Finder 2.0. Those 2 frameworks are different. They are different in how they approach our strengths, and they are also different in how they see strengths. But they can be definitely very helpful too. There are links and related exercises in the resources. Once you've completed the VIA survey, and maybe done some of the exercises you find in the additional resources, you will have a clearer picture of your strengths. Maybe it will also be easier for you to spot them in others. But knowing your strengths is only one part of the story. It only gets really exciting when you start applying them more often. Because in the end, Strengths are only strengths when they can be effectively applied. A strength without application in the right situation is nothing more than untapped potential. So when it comes to how can we apply our strengths, this is very specific to you individually. Even though I added resources with lots of suggestions, if you want to get most out of your strengths, you have to be creative. So after you identified your top strengths, choose one of them, and for the following week, use the strength in a new way every day. Again, be creative about it. This exercise, if done regularly, has been shown to have a long-term positive effect on your well-being. And the beauty of applying our strengths is that they not only affect our happiness, but also our success. Still, there are a few things to keep in mind. First, apply them. That's easy. Practical wisdom can only be reached through practice. There's no substitute for exercising our strengths in the right way and understanding why. More controversial is that our strengths are not fixed from birth. They can be developed. Remember here to keep a growth mindset. And thirdly, working on our weaknesses is not irrelevant. Do not forget about them. I'm not advocating ignoring your weaknesses completely. It is just that we have to shift more focus towards strengths, because that's where our biggest potential lies. And here we already are at the roundup of this lecture. Strengths enable us to be at our best. We need more focus on what we are good at. In this class, we'll deal with one of the most important factors for our happiness: relationships. We will soon see how relationships are important to us and why they are so important to us. And then we'll see how we can transform our relationships to make them more happy and more fulfilled. In particular, we will first look at what not to do. 4 behaviors that can, with up to 94% accuracy, predict divorce. But after that, we will turn to the happiest couples and look at what they do differently and learn how we can nurture happy and fulfilled relationships. We will start off this section by taking a closer look at another research study, the Harvard Man study. This is not just any study, but it's one of the longest running and most ambitious psychological studies of all time. The Harvard Man study ran over 75 years and followed young men from Harvard University and the city of Boston throughout their whole lives. Altogether, more than 700 men participated. It started shortly after they entered college in the 1930s and ended just a few years ago. The goal was to identify the life circumstances and personal characteristics that distinguish the happiest, most fulfilled man from the least happy and least successful ones. In his conclusion, after almost 3/4 of a century of research, George Wayland, the principal investigator, concluded with these words. He said, "We have 70 years of evidence that our relationships with other people matter, and matter more than anything else in the world." And he's not the only one to say this. Another study, very aptly called Very Happy People, by 2 of the leading researchers in the field, looked at more than 200 people and wanted to find out what do the top 10% in terms of happiness do differently than the rest and the least happy people. When they compared them, they found that the happiest respondents did not exercise significantly more. They did not participate in religious activities significantly more, or experience more objectively defined good events, like getting a promotion or something like this. It turned out that there was only one factor that distinguished the happiest 10% from the rest. The only factor that was consistently different was that the happiest 10% had very good social relationships. Having good social relationships was not sufficient for being happy, but it was necessary. So there is only one thing that it seems impossible to miss out on if you want to be very happy. We need to have fulfilling relationships to be very happy and to thrive. These two studies that I just told you about provide very strong support. But they're not the only studies. There are hundreds of more that show how social relationships are linked to longevity, lower stress, improved overall well-being, and so on and so on. But to find out why relationships are so crucial for our well-being, we have to turn to evolutionary psychology. Because we human beings have an innate need to form social bonds and connect with other people. It is literally wired into our biology, because when we make a positive social connection, our body releases a chemical called oxytocin. That's a hormone and a neurotransmitter that induces pleasure and reduces our stress. That means that each positive social connection that we engage in throughout our day bolsters our immune system. We literally get more resilient, more resistant, physically, but also psychologically, towards stresses, towards adversities that we have to face throughout our day. And these research findings are true for relationships in general, for our friends and family, for our romantic partners, just as much as for colleagues at work or people in our community that we interact with. Throughout the rest of this class, we will engage specifically with marriages and romantic relationships. But nevertheless, most things that I'm gonna tell you are also true for relationships with friends and other family members. It is the same underlying principles that govern our romantic relationships that make also our normal, non-romantic relationships more fulfilling and more fulfilled. So let's start off with how not to do it. John and Julie Gottman, two acclaimed love scientists, identified the so-called 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. These are 4 kinds of behaviors that allow them to predict with up to 94% accuracy if a couple is heading for divorce, just by observing them in their laboratory. So they bring in 2 couples, have them talk about certain kind of topics that are relevant for the relationships, and just by the behavior the couple exhibits to each other, they can say with up to 94% accuracy if they are going to divorce within the next 5 years. That is incredible. And these 4 types of behavior is what they call the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And we're going to take a look at them more closely. The first of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse is criticism. In the worst relationships, partners really often point with fingers at each other and are very critical. There's an attitude that is kind of diagnosing their partner's defects, personality defects. When they complain, they use words such as always or never. Like, you never listen to me, or how could you forget this? You're such an ignorant person. So criticism is not framed in the behavior of the other person. It's targeted to the personality of the other person. The best predictor for a divorce is a behavior they call contempt. That's the second of the horsemen of the apocalypse. Contempt, that's when partners have an attitude of superiority towards one another. For example, you think you're more intelligent than your partner, or you're more punctual than your partner. And these attitudes often express as hostility, mockery, and disgust. This is the worst of the 4 horsemen, and almost certainly leads to divorce or breakup. The third horseman of the apocalypse is called stonewalling. That's a term John and Julie Gottman used for people who are withdrawing from conflict. Withdrawing from conflict up to an extent where it's not clear anymore if they are actually even listening. So a stonewaller is really tuned out of a conversation. The fourth and last one of the four horsemen is defensiveness. People become defensive and say, it's not my fault, it's yours, and start a counterattack. Or they present themselves as an innocent victim. The best and most fulfilled relationships, however, do exactly the opposite. They are open to criticism and take it as interesting feedback, what their partner tells about them, or tells to them. So these four horsemen are the most detrimental behaviors for a relationship. But there are other things as well. John Gottman studied marriages for decades now, and he, for example, also observed that about 70% of the conflicts that married couples face are perpetual conflicts that can never be resolved. So how do they know that? They studied a set of marriages over a 4-year period, coded the conflicts, every single word that they heard. And to their surprise, only 30% of the problems were specific to a given situation. The rest were associated with basic differences in personality or differences that are closely tied to each partner's concept of who they are and what they think of themselves as a person. But guess what? Getting a different partner doesn't free you from perpetual conflict. You just trade in one set and get back another. There is a serious misconception when it comes to relationships, especially among young people, that see romantic relationships as a matter of finding the right person, the one perfect man or woman with whom we will be happily forever. But this is a flawed idea. It's just as much a myth of happiness as the one we talked about in the beginning. Relationship researchers have consistently proven that the most important part of being happily together is the process of being together and not the finding of the right partner. This is not to say that we can be with any person in the world. That would be neither true. But at the same time, it's not about finding just one right person. It's about making it work. It's about the process. So this process is what positive psychology is taking a closer look at. He wants to understand the process of being together happily. Remember, at the beginning of this whole course, when we looked at what positive psychology actually is, what kind of question it is asking? Let's go back there for a second. We said that the difference of positive psychology to the traditional psychological approach is that it operates on a health model rather than the disease model. That means it looks at strengths, competencies, and pursuing happiness. And this is also something that we have to do when we look at relationships. John Gottman said, "At first, when I figured out how to predict divorce, I thought I had found the key to saving marriages. But like so many experts before me, I was wrong. I was not able to crack the code to saving marriages until I started to analyze what went right in happy marriages." Positive psychology's question is, what makes some relationships thrive and grow stronger over time? This is the questions we're going to ask now. We are going to tackle this question by using the mining model of relationship development. A researcher called Harvey developed it and identified 5 specific components of successful, fulfilling relationships. Couples looking to improve their relationships may look at this model as a bit of a guide on how to understand what a truly healthy relationship can look like. It is important to note that no one can do this perfectly, and most couples have issues in some dimensions. So take this as an ideal model and try to learn from it, because one of the reasons why positive psychology exists is because we want to learn from the best. The 5 dimensions in the mining model of relationships are knowing and being known, benefit finding with the other partner, as we talked in the beginning, accepting, equality of the partners, and finally, understanding the relationship as a journey. So let's together look at these in turn. Knowing and being known is about learning about each other. It's about really getting to know each other deeply and meaningfully. Couples who are thriving really understand each other. They understand each other's thoughts and feelings, attitudes, and past history. What is essential is to keep up a desire to understand each other. This is rather easy at the beginning of a relationship, but the longer the relationship lasts, and this is then especially true for marriages, the more challenging it becomes, because we tend to take one another for granted. We tend to think that we already know. We already know what this person wants and thinks and likes. The key is to keep on being interested. There is always something new to discover. There's always something new to learn about the other person, because everybody's developing and nobody stays the same. We're constantly evolving, our dreams change, our goals change. And in order to really be known by the other person, we must open up. We must really open up and be vulnerable to the other person. There is a great book that I very recommend you, which goes very much into detail about being vulnerable and how this can affect every part of our life. It's Brené Brown, and she talks about daring greatly. You will find a link in the resources. Summing up, the first part, knowing and being known, really requires us to open up, to spend time with one another, and be interested in one another, and be willing to be vulnerable, so you can really be known by the other person. Secondly, it turns out that people in the most fulfilling relationship engage in something that we already discussed: benefit finding. Remember, in the fourth lecture, we looked at how we can see the same things from different angles. We can focus on each other's weaknesses or each other's faults. We can focus on the other person's mistakes, or we can focus on their good intentions, for example. So benefit finding is also crucial in relationships. It's about focusing on what works and what is good. What also matters a lot in this respect is how we explain our partner's behavior to ourselves. What works well is attributing positive behavior to the character and the intentions of our partner, and attributing negative behavior to external circumstances. And to do this until we're proven wrong. So in essence, benefit finding here asks us to give our friends and our partners the benefit of the doubt. If you try this in your personal life, you can see how this gradually can transform your life. Because if you believe that people have good intentions, you will see also this can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. The third part of a fulfilling relationship is acceptance and respect. Acceptance and respect are necessary, even or perhaps especially in an argument. Relationship masters aim to listen to each other respectfully, accept the other person's responses, and work out compromises. It's perfectly healthy to complain about something specific, but not criticize the whole person. Remember, this is exactly the opposite to the criticism part in the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Well-functioning couples do not allow negativity to become habitual. They use rewards rather than punishments in an argument. Researchers, for example, also found that happy couples have a ratio of negative to positive exchanges of 1 to 5. That doesn't mean that there is no conflict, which is actually an important part, but there is much more positive communication than negative communication and conflict. But this acceptance and respect is not only during conflict. fulfilled relationships are about much more than simply handling conflict well. And one of the defining characteristics of a lastingly happy relationship is the way partners or friends respond when they receive good news. A researcher in California called Shelley Gable suggests that supporting partners when good things happen is as important in building relationships as supporting them when bad things happen. What she found in the research is that couples with strong relationships have a particular way of responding to each other when good things happen. Here's a matrix that shows us the 4 different types of responses that we can give to good news. The most productive and positive response is what we call active and constructive in the upper left corner. To understand all of them, let's consider an example. Active and constructive when, let's say, your partner comes home and tells you about a promotion they got. Active constructive responding would be, that's great, that's awesome, tell me more about it, I know you've been working so hard for it. Wow, so where were you when they told you? Tell me exactly, tell me everything about it. You are enthusiastic about it, you maintain eye contact, and you display positive emotions. This is what's called active and constructive, and this is what makes relationships flourish. The most common way to respond is passive constructive. That's saying something like, that's good news. I'm happy for you. That's great. There's little energy, the response may be a little bit delayed, and there's little nonverbal communication. The active destructive way to respond will be something along the lines of, ooh, that sounds like a lot of responsibility to take on. There will probably be more stress now, you will have to work longer, do you at least get more paid? The passive destructive is not even acknowledging the good news. It's saying something like, what's for dinner? Or simply leaving the room. You may want to try to incorporate a more active, constructive way of responding to other people's, your friends, your partner's good news, to show sincere enthusiasm for a good event. Being excited, being happy for the other person, and showing genuine interest in the good event that's described by them. These are the things that over time make a relationship grow, make a relationship more positive and more flourishing. The 4th part relates to a sense of equality in the relationship, that one gives into the relationship is approximately equal to what one gets out of a relationship. A relationship is working well when nobody is taking advantage of. Distribution of housework can be an example. While it is perfectly okay to take on certain roles, for convenience, for example, or because the other person doesn't like one or the other thing, doing so has to involve respect, recognition, and appreciation. However, that does not mean that we have to keep a tab on things. That's very detrimental. That's bad for a relationship. Instead, the happy couples just do things because they feel happy about the relationship and happy about doing them. But overall, there has to be a sense of equality, a sense of mutual respect and appreciation. Last but not least, the most happy relationships understand that the relationship is a journey. Minding is a process rather than a final destination, and it requires time and continuity. This process never stops because the relationship is always developing. People are always developing, adjusting to new information, changes, and changes in life cycles also. Because we grow older, we reach different levels of maturity. So for this, I very strongly encourage you to build positive relationship rituals. And you will have a bunch of these, a bunch of suggestions in your resources. I will just repeat, because it's so important, that in essence, these points are true for both fulfilled marriages and romantic relationships, as well as for lifelong friendships. And and fulfilling relationships with other family members or work colleagues. Those relationships matter more than anything else in the world for our well-being. Building, fulfilling, lasting relationships with our partner, family, and friends is likely to be one of the most effective strategies and ways to live a happy and fulfilled life. In this lecture, we will deal with the so-called dark side of our lives. We'll start by establishing an understanding that we actually do need negative emotions. We do need anger, sadness, and frustration sometimes. But then we will move on and explore how our negative emotions, our negative feelings, all too often are not productive and not helpful. And in these instances, we will have two broad strategies to deal with it. Those are called problem-focused and the other one emotion-focused coping strategies. First, we'll look at the problem-focused coping strategies. And these are things like dealing with the problem right away, or seeking out social support, doing exercise, or engaging in something that is called expressive writing to overcome tough times. The second broad strategy is emotion-focused coping. For this, we will look at the story of Viktor Frankl, a psychologist who survived the concentration camps, and then go on and revisit optimism and optimistic mindsets. In this lecture, after we talked so much about how to be happy and positive emotions and why it's good to feel happy, we also have to acknowledge another thing, and that is life is not always funny or nice. And the goal of this course is certainly not to make you happy all the time. Positive psychology is a science, and so it would be unprofessional and plain wrong to claim that it's about constant happiness. What's important to understand is that everyone experiences negative emotions. Emotions like anger, frustration, and sadness. It's part of being human. In fact, Tal Ben-Shahar gives the example that there are only two kinds of people who do not experience negative emotions. The first group of those are psychopaths. By definition, they do not experience emotions like shame or embarrassing, so they, up to a certain extent, do not experience negative emotions. And the second group of people who do not experience negative emotions are dead. So if you look at this from this perspective, it's good if you experience negative emotions, because it means that you're still alive and that you're not a psychopath. And that is the reason why we as humans should always give ourselves the permission to experience these emotions. It's natural, it's normal, because everybody does experience these negative emotions once in a while. It only really starts to become a problem when our negative mood is not anymore temporary, but chronic. This is what psychologists call major depressive disorder, what we would normally call depression. But in normal doses, negative feelings can in fact be good. Here's what Joseph Forgas, an Australian psychologist, has to say about it. He says that bad moods are seen in our happiness-focused culture as representing a problem. But we need to be aware that temporary, mild negative feelings have important benefits. And then he continues to say, it's shallow and untrue to assume that positive feelings can only have positive consequences, and that negative feelings can only have negative consequences. Both positive and negative emotions have evolutionary benefits. And our negative emotions have a function. They have a part in our normal human life and are also a potential for growth. Sometimes it's important to feel sad or angry. One example would be if something bad happens to us. Let's say
we or someone we love gets very ill. In these instances, it's absolutely logical that we feel sad. Or if we have a breakup with a partner, it's absolutely logical to feel sad. It makes sense. Similarly, anger can be an adequate and valuable response if somebody treats us in an unfair manner. Anger is a legitimate reaction to something that is perceived as unjust or unfair. The bottom line of all of this is that it's important that we give ourselves the permission to experience also negative emotions, that we accept those as part of normal human life. Often we encounter difficulties and situations in our lives that we need to overcome. We have problems to solve. Maybe we got laid off and need to look for a new job, or went through a breakup recently. If we face one of these tough situations, our first choice is to deal with the problem. Throughout this video, we'll discuss so-called problem-focused coping strategies. In simple words, that means strategies to solve these problems and deal with them constructively. The first one that we're going to look at is dealing with it. How can we set goals to deal with problems? The second one is turning to others, to friends and family. Thirdly, we talk about how exercise can be such an important tool. And fourthly and lastly, we talk about expressive writing. Let's look at those in turn. The first one is the most obvious one, to deal with the problem and to find a solution. Finding a solution is a process that is very individual, very specific to your needs and your specific problem. That's why in the resources you will find an action plan for effective problem solving. This one leads you through the most important step when it comes to problem solving. It's based on a therapeutic approach called problem-solving therapy and was proven to be a very helpful framework to deal with all kinds of problems. Whether it's a job search or overcoming a breakup, to making a difficult life decision or handling conflict with a coworker. These few steps you can use as a framework to try to solve all kinds of problems that you encounter throughout your life. The second one may also be quite obvious now, after we talked about the incredible importance of relationships in our lives. But still, I had to mention it here, because so many of us, and that includes me, have the tendency to turn inward when we face stress and pressure and tough times. The rituals that we build up with friends, for example meeting every Friday after work, are the first ones we let go when our pressure mounts. But this is a flawed strategy. In fact, a bunch of studies show the importance of social support for our resilience and resistance in face of problems. One study, for example, looked at people who had a heart attack, and they found that those people who received emotional support from others during the next 6 months after their heart attack were 3 times more likely to survive. This means that friends and family can literally save our lives just by being there. Similarly, another study showed that participating in a breast cancer support group actually doubled the woman's life expectancy after the surgeries. What this shows us is that our friends and family have the power to save our lives simply by being there and supporting us, by being somebody to turn to. What I'm advocating is here to make use of these incredible support, to turn towards your friends and to build relationships that you can turn to in tough times as well. We often hear about the physical benefits of exercise. Those are quite commonly known, such as reducing the risks of heart attack, stroke, diabetes, high blood pressure, certain cancers, and in general, increasing our immune system functioning. But there are also psychological benefits that are not as well known. Among them is that we get less anxious if we engage in physical activity regularly. And we are also less prone to stress, and our self-esteem is increased. Last but not least, it also makes us feel good. And this is especially true for people with depression or people facing tough times. An amazing study done brought in a bunch of depressed people with depressive symptoms. And they split them up into 3 different groups. One of the groups, they gave antidepressants. The other group, they gave antidepressants and ordered them to exercise 30 minutes for 3 times a week. And the third group, they only instructed them to exercise 30 minutes for 3 times a week. And what they found was that after 3 months, all of those groups showed similar decreases in depressive symptoms. That means that the researchers showed that exercise alone was as effective as the state-of-the-art antidepressants on the market. But that's not even all. There's more, because after these 3 months, they stopped. They stopped giving them antidepressants, they stopped the study, and waited for another 3 months. So after another 3 months of not doing anything with the patients, with the depressed people, they again looked at how are they doing now? Are they doing worse than before? How many people relapsed back into depression? And what was most amazing, that in the antidepressants groups, the relapse rates were about 40%. And in the exercise-only group, not even 10% of the people relapsed back into depression. That, in essence, means that physical activity is as powerful at reducing depression as antidepressants, the best antidepressants on the market, and its long-term effects are way better. That is amazing, and that's why physical activity is such a powerful tool for people who are feeling sad a lot, who are depressed, who have a shallow mood. There is even much more to know about this topic and physical exercise in general. And it's a very undermastered area in psychology in general. But this would go beyond the scope of this course. Just rest assured that physical activity can be very powerful, not only for our physical, but also for our psychological well-being. The fourth strategy is called coping through writing, or expressive writing. With this exercise, you have to be a little careful, because it asks you to write about a very upsetting or traumatic experience. Nevertheless, it has been found to be an exercise that has greatly benefited many people. The instructions are to write for 15 minutes for 4 days. It has been researched quite extensively, and you will have clear instructions in the additional resources. The results of this exercise are quite remarkable. In the days after the study, that means after the 4 days of writing about these traumatic experiences, those people who wrote about it are less anxious, become more social, their well-being or happiness increases, and what's most remarkable, their physical health improves. Simply by writing about emotionally upsetting experiences, our immune system improves. So try it out and see how it's working for you. In this video class, we will take a look at the third way to cope when bad things happen to us. This category is called emotion-focused coping. And I want to start this section by telling the story of this man. His name is Viktor Frankl. He's a powerful example for our capacity to choose our response to what happens to us. Viktor Frankl was a psychotherapist who specialized in treating depression, especially for those prone to suicide. But he was also Jewish and lived in Nazi Germany. So in September of 1942, as a young doctor, he and his new bride, his mother, father and brother, were arrested in Vienna. they were all taken to concentration camps. He was reduced to nothing but his naked existence. As he entered the camp, they took the last of his belongings, including his clothes, his wedding ring, and the manuscript of a book that he was writing. Then every inch of his body was shaved, and he was escorted into a shower room. The only consolation that he had was that real water dripped from the shower, instead of gas. In these camps, his whole family and everybody he loved died. He was the only one who survived. And when he came out of the concentration camp, after more than 3 years of the most inhuman treatment that you can imagine, he shared one of the most important insights he had. He said that when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. In the concentration camps, Viktor Frankl began to understand that in every situation, no matter how helpless we are and how terrible the situation is, we humans are able to change our attitude towards what's happening to us. This is something that nobody can take away from us, and that's why Frankl called it the last of human freedoms. And with this insight, I want to go back to a topic that we already looked at earlier in this course. We are revisiting optimism and pessimism. Back when we talked about optimism, we looked at it in terms of us expecting positive things to happen. We looked at self-fulfilling prophecies. And we saw the advantages that optimists enjoy and how it is better for us to be optimistic in many situations. And now we turn again to the optimism-pessimism dichotomy, but from a different perspective. Because optimists also react differently when negative events happen to them. Fortunately, we hardly ever face circumstances like Viktor Frankl did. But we do have an inherent negativity bias that makes us focus more on the bad things that happen to us and blow the negative events out of proportion. Very often, we nowadays make our own misery. We focus too much on the negative and what's not working. The lesson to be learned is that we can choose our response. No matter what happens to us, we are always capable to control our attitude towards it. For the rest of this video class, we will first learn about the different attitudes that we can bring to negative events, that is, optimism, pessimism, and then secondly, we will learn how we can better control it and how we can rewire our brain. Let's start off by turning at the first point, the optimists and the pessimists. The defining characteristics of a pessimist is that they tend to believe that bad events will last a long time, will undermine everything they do, and are their own fault. These characteristics are called the 3 Ps that make the difference between an optimist and a pessimist view. Let's assume something bad happens to us. Pessimists interpret negative events firstly as permanent. That's the first P. Pessimists think that it's probably going to be permanent, meaning that it will happen again and again in the future. The second P is that a negative event is seen to be pervasive, meaning that it is not just this one event, but just one more piece of evidence of a pervasive trend. For example, you locked your car keys in the car and think, that's typically me, I'm just a chaotic, mindless person. The third P is personal. That means that pessimists look at negative events as something that has to do with them. A salesperson, for example, gets rejected and assumes that they are not good at sales. This is a pessimistic way to look at it. Optimists would think that it's a product that's hard to sell, or maybe that the economy is bad, or something like this, something outside their personal influence. The same thing goes the other way around. With a positive event, they do the opposite. Comparing to the pessimists, The optimists are confronted with the same hard knocks of this world, but they think about misfortune in the opposite way. They tend to believe that defeat is just a temporary setback, that its causes are confined to this one case. The optimists believe that defeat is not their own fault. They look at circumstances, bad luck, or think that other people brought it about. Such people are not affected by defeat. Confronted by a bad situation, they perceive it as a challenge and they try harder. These two habits of thinking about causes have consequences. Literally hundreds of studies show that pessimists give up more easily and get depressed more often. These experiments also show that optimists do much better in school and in college, at work and on the playing field. They regularly even exceed the predictions of the aptitude tests. When optimists run for office, they are more apt to be elected than pessimists are. And their health is unusually good. They age well, they are much freer than most of us from the usual physical ills of middle age, and the Nun study suggests that optimists even live longer. For people who are more pessimists, all this is bad news. But the good news is that optimism can be learned. Even optimists can benefit from learning how to change, because almost all optimists have periods of at least mild pessimism, so it can help us anyway. In the resources, you can find a link to a test if you are more optimist or more pessimist. Usually, we are not simply one or the other. For most of us, it depends on the situation we are in. We tend to act differently in different areas of our lives, and that holds also true when it comes to optimism. In order to understand how we can learn to interpret events more optimistically, we will look at the so-called ABC model. The psychologist Albert Ellis created the ABC model to help us understand and control our reactions to adversity. ABC stands for adversity, belief, and consequence. Here is how it works. Ellis observed that rather than the adversity itself, it is our belief about the cause of adversity that actually triggers our feeling response and our behavior. That is, adversity leads to belief, which leads to consequences. It is not what happens to us that causes our reactions. Rather, it is what we think about what happens to us that determines our response. Let's look at an example. We face an adversity. Let's say someone shouts at us. Then you form a belief about this event. This person must be angry at me. This person doesn't like me, or this person wants to harm me somehow. And then, as a result of this belief, we react in a certain way. In this example, we might feel afraid. But as we saw with Viktor Frankl, we are not slaves. It can be learned. Frankl says that between the stimulus and the response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. This last of human freedoms that Frankl talked about. We might not have the control of an adversity, but we always have the control over our beliefs. In order to understand the ABC better and how we can change it, let's take a closer look at two ABC chains and how we can react differently to the same situation. Here, the situation is my partner or my child or like a good friend of us, whoever, hasn't returned my phone calls. This is the adversity. As a result, I form a certain belief about it. In this case, I think something terrible must have happened. And the consequence is that I'm worried all day, that I'm feeling anxious, something might have happened because they're not returning my phone calls. Here another ABC chain with the same adversity. The adversity stays the same, my partner or child hasn't returned my phone calls. But then I think she must be very busy today. And as a result of this thought, this belief,
I don't feel bad about it, and I go about my day. You see the difference? It's the same adversity. It's just our belief that it's very different, and our belief that triggers the different consequences, the different responses. One more example. You've been on a diet, a strict diet for more than 3 weeks, and now you cannot resist eating a delicious piece of cake. The way you think about it is, I was able to stick to my diet for more than 3 weeks now. Maybe I did deserve this piece of cake, but now it's time for me to focus again on my diet. The consequence is that you don't feel bad about it and continue your diet as strictly as before. Another way to look at it is you have been, again, on a strict diet for more than 3 weeks, and now you cannot resist eating a delicious piece of cake. But your thoughts here are, oh, I'm so weak. My whole diet is blown now. I'm terrible. I don't have any willpower at all. And the consequence is, I feel terrible. You decide to eat another piece of cake, and because it doesn't matter anymore, because you're weak, your diet is blown anyway. To wrap it up one more time. When we encounter adversity, we react by thinking about it. Our thoughts very quickly become beliefs, and these beliefs may become so habitual that we don't even realize we have them. And those beliefs then have consequences. They are the direct causes of what we feel and what we do about it. For this, you can find a writing exercise in the resources. And you can also find an ABC reflection sheet that looks something like this. Use it to record 6 ABC sequences from your life over the next few days. You will find clear instructions, as always, in the additional materials. Once you have identified a few ABC sequences, we are then able to start changing our beliefs. And there are 2 options to deal with these beliefs: distraction and disputation. The first option is distraction. Try distracting yourself when you start creating negative beliefs. There are several ways for us to do this. A famous, quite effective strategy is to stand up and shout, "Stop." This might be weird if you're among other people, but it has been shown to be very effective. One, a little bit more quiet option, is having a small card in your pocket that says "Stop" on it, and you just pull it out and look at it. And yet another option is wearing a rubber band around your wrist and snapping it hard to make your thoughts stop. This last version has also been shown to be very effective because it combines it with a physical stimulus. Once you stop ruminating then, you need to shift your attention somewhere else. Focus intently on something else for around a minute or 2 maybe. This can be a song maybe that's coming to your head, or anything else basically that's not your negative belief in the first place. My favorite option is to write those troubling thoughts down in the moment they come to my mind. Then set a time every day, let's say 9 p.m. for 10 minutes, to think about what you wrote during this day. This strategy will enable you to let go of the negative thoughts in the very moment, because after all, you will be able to revisit them later anyway. The second option then is disputation. Disputing negative thought patterns is more effective in the long run because it prevents negative thoughts to come back. The way you do this is by asking yourself, well, what are the facts? What is the evidence for my belief? And if there is true evidence for it, then you can ask yourself, what alternative ways are there to look at it? And even if your beliefs are correct, you can ask yourself, what does this imply? And then the last stage is that even if this belief is true now, does this thinking about it now serve me well? If no, use the distraction method.
And if yes, how can you go about changing it? What neuroscientists tell us that the more frequently optimistic thoughts are rehearsed, the more natural they become. With practice, reframing, and consciously generating optimistic thoughts, optimism can become an automatic response. Let me now round up this whole lecture on dealing with negative events, with negative situations and feelings. Finding true happiness is not about feeling good all the time. It's quite the contrary. Being sad, angry, and fearful might be appropriate sometimes. Remember that we can face adversity in 3 different ways. Firstly, we can accept the situation and the way we are feeling about it. Then we can change our behavior. And thirdly, we can change our beliefs.
Welcome to the last lecture of the course. You almost made it. This is just a summary of the most important points that we discussed throughout this lecture. I picked 5 which are meant to exemplify what is the essence of this course. The first one is focus on what works, because what we focus on determines our reality, and it determines the way we are and the way we behave and the way we think. The second one is that happiness actually leads to success, and not only the other way around. It's not only when I'm successful, then I will be happy, but also when I'm happy, then I will be more successful. The third point is about embracing the moment. That's about mindfulness. Because this very moment is the only moment that we are alive in. So let's embrace it. The fourth point is that our relationships are crucial. They matter, and they matter probably more than anything else in the world. And last but not least, the fifth point is, it's all in our action. It's what we do. We've seen this over and over again. If you just look at self-esteem, for example, or mindsets, it's about what we do that determines who we become. Thank you for going through this course. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I hope that you learned something and that you will be able to take away something to make really positive, long-lasting changes in your lives. Again, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Again, here you see the main summary points that we just discussed. And now I want to finish by drawing our attention to 2 highly important facts about our life. The first one is that we are all connected very much to the people around us. Caring about our own happiness is not enough. We are not disconnected from the rest of the world. Our behaviors affect others, and we are affected by others' behavior. This is a subtle and mostly unconscious process, but what we usually do not realize is that our attitudes and behaviors not only affect those very close to us, but also those further away. In fact, up to 3rd-degree contacts are affected by our behavior. That means that if I gain weight, one of my friend's friend will gain weight. Similarly, if your friend's friend stops smoking, you may stop smoking because of that. And that if your friend's friend becomes happier, you also become happier. This is not an empty assertion, but a sheer fact. Nicholas Christakis, a network scientist from Yale University, put it like this. If we are connected to everyone else by 6 degrees, and we can influence them up to 3 degrees, then one way to think about ourselves is that each of us can reach about halfway to everybody else on the planet. And this is one of the reasons what makes these lessons so powerful. One of the reasons why our own behavior matters so much, and why if we take responsibility for our own well-being, we also take responsibility for the well-being of others. And the second point is also the most important point of the whole class. Take action. Because without it, it's all for nothing. After all,
Knowing the words is not the same thing as living the meaning. Suppose I memorize the printed instructions on a first aid kit. Does that mean I can give first aid? No. The full meaning comes when I admit I know nothing and then try, practice, and succeed. And that is why I encourage you now to take one last time out with me. Ask yourself, which of the exercises that I learned about throughout this course am I most likely to sustain on a regular basis? What appealed most to you? Okay, I hope that there are some exercises or themes that you do make a regular habit. So now there's only one thing left. Let me finish with a quote by William Change. And he says, "To change your life, start immediately, do it flamboyantly, and no exceptions." Thank you.